dirt road in a gooseneck, saddle up with me. Dry land in God's country, crops far as I can see. The headlights on both ends of my day. This country life is for me. Ride with us, HPJ. Ride with us, HPJ.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Latzke, and I'm the Associate Editor for High Plains Journal. Welcome to Soil Health U Keynote Conversations, featuring Jimmy Emmons, Dr. Kris Nichols, and Rick Clark. Now, for 71 years, High Plains Journal has been a weekly fixture in your mailboxes, over your computer screens, and more. And through those 7 decades, we've brought you the information about the trends that bring you success, from the farm to the pasture and beyond. Now, when we began Soil Health U 4 years ago, our mission was to bring the latest knowledge on regenerative agriculture to you, our readers, our neighbors, so that you could make the decisions that are best for your farms and your families. That mission hasn't changed. As we've evolved with technology, from print to our website, hpj.com, to our HPJ Direct emailed newsletters, and our podcast, HPJ Talk, we've committed to bringing the knowledge to you, where you are. And that includes pivoting to this virtual Soil Health U keynote conversation during this pandemic. Now, like all of you, we wish we could be there in Salina at the in-person event this year, but safety has to come first. And so we, along with our sponsors, PrairieFood, Exapta Solutions, and Ward Labs, have turned this virtual platform to bring Soil Health U to you. I'm sure many of you have had some experience with the Zoom webinar platform recently, but for those of you who may be unfamiliar with how this will work, let me share some notes. First off, we've already muted all of your microphones and your videos, and we ask that you keep those that way throughout the rest of the recording, so that way we don't have any disruptions for our speakers. To ask any questions, please click on the chat button at the bottom of the Zoom screen and type your questions in the pop-up box that appears. We've built plenty of time to ask questions during the webinar because this day is about you, the producer. All of our sessions will be recorded, and the recordings will be posted soon after we're done on www.soilhealthu.net. Registered participants will receive an email notice when the videos are posted. And now, to moderate today's Soil Health U, it is my pleasure to introduce Jessica Gnad. Currently hailing from Manhattan, Kansas, Jessica's path to soil health started with a curiosity about healthy food options in rural communities. She works as a strategic content developer with an emphasis on regenerative agriculture education within the High Plains. Jess is a dedicated soil health advocate with more than a decade of experience in the food, finance, and farming industries. Jessica, the screen is yours. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here, everybody. And most importantly, thank you, Jenny. Once again, that was Jenny Latzke, the Associate Editor for High Plains Journal. Jenny, it has been a pleasure to work for your team. So let's get kick-started here. The production of Soil Health U would not be possible without the support of our sponsors. Today's event is brought to you by High Plains Journal, PrairieFood, Exapta Solutions, and Ward Laboratories. We would also like to thank one of our longtime supporters of Soil Health U since the very beginning. Green Cover Seed has been there for us with their continued commitment to soil health education. So thank you so much to Green Cover Seed. Now let's learn a little bit more about Ward Laboratories. Ward Laboratories is a full-service agricultural testing laboratory headquartered in Kearney, Nebraska, serving the local community and a growing clientele of global producers. Their team is highly qualified scientists, agronomists, livestock experts, and other agricultural professionals, and they have spent nearly 4 decades analyzing millions of samples and steadily earning a reputation for excellence with domestic and international clientele. Additionally, soil health analysis provides producers with a tool to compare management practices. Their professional staff consults with clients daily, providing the information on amendment recommendations, agronomy, soil health, management practices, animal nutrition, and much more. Their goal is to provide analytics and guidance, which results in producers being more economically and environmentally responsible. So thank you so much for your support, Ward Laboratories. We are so glad to have you here. So now we're going to hear from one more sponsor. We're going to hear from Exapta Solutions. In particular, I'd like to introduce the Chief Operating Officer and Sales Manager, Leah Laney, to deliver this short video message.
Who are we? Our daily goal is to set out and help producers do a better job of stand establishment and continuous no-till. And then we do whatever it takes. We test new ideas, we figure out what's most important in the seeding installation process, and we figure out how to make no-till seeding both more effective, efficient, and less of a hassle for daily and yearly maintenance. When a need goes unmet, we set out to find or design and build a solution. Our passion is to educate producers and share the importance of no-till farming, the importance of saving our soils and regenerating our soils. No-till farming is truly the only sustainable farming system, whereas all others degrade the soil by loss of soil organic matter, by wind and water erosion. To this day, humankind depends on the thin topsoil that covers our world's farmland. So we must continually reduce erosion and regenerate our soils. Our customer success is Exapta success, plain and simple. If our farmers are successful after taking advantage of our resources online, attending our seeding schools, and implementing our top shelf products on their equipment, then our success is at great risk. We focus on not just selling any device, but devoting our time and efforts in providing top shelf, most superior products for our customers to get the most out of their seeding equipment. More acres, better emergence, higher yields, and greater profit, that's the end goal. We are committed in sharing our knowledge on no-till to help producers become more successful and profitable no-till farmers. We have added several game-changer products to our lineup, and we are just so thrilled and excited to offer these solutions to our customers. To quickly name a few is the Eric's non-greaseless depth axle adjustment kits. This is the last piece to making these units completely greaseless, running alongside the Eric's firming, closing, pins and bushing kits. Also offered by Exapta that's new this year is the Eric's cover plates and T-handles. Do away with the John Deere egged out cover plates and upgrade for a one-time fix with the Eric's cover plates and T-handles. Check out our Polyflex gauge wheel tires. This product features the long wear lasting life of polyurethane, along with the pliability and flexibility to shed mud and to keep your row unit running smooth through the field. And lastly, don't forget to check out our proven cornerstone products, Uniforce hydraulic down pressure system for John Deere drills, Valiance, Mojo wires, and Thompson closing wheels. Thank you, and have a great 2021 spring planting season.
Thank you very much, Leah. And you can find information about Exapta Solutions, PrairieFood, Ward Laboratories, and Green Cover Seed by heading over to soilhealthu.net/sponsors. And I believe they're also going to place information about each individual company inside the chat box. So feel free to open up the chat box and check out that information. So I'm going to transition here to some really big news that we have to announce here at Soil Health U. The Kansas Department of Agriculture and High Plains Journal are proud to announce a partnership agreement to provide access to today's virtual Soil Health U event to over 525 conservation district supervisors across each and every one of the 105 counties in Kansas. This partnership aims to increase the accessibility of soil health education to the Division of Conservation. Thank you to the Kansas Department of Agriculture and High Plains Journal for this monumental partnership. I would like to introduce to you Andrew Lyon, who was the featured speaker at last year's Soil Health event. Andrew now serves as the Director of Conservation with the Department of Agriculture. Andy, welcome being here. Can you just share with us a little bit about this partnership?
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this morning. The Kansas Department of Agriculture Division of Conservation is very happy and proud to help support Soil Health U and develop this partnership. We really look forward to seeing everybody in Salina again next year and getting back to in person. But I really commend everyone for joining the conference virtually this year. I know people are getting tired of the virtual meetings, but there's a lot of great information to be shared today, a really good lineup. And so again, I think that this is a partnership that can grow over time. And we really look forward to working with everyone further in the future. I would encourage everyone in the meantime to go in and talk to your local county conservation districts, both here in the state of Kansas and across the country. Those county conservation district folks in those local USDA service centers can really help be able to find the ways that the programs that are available can help you in your journey to improve soil health. So those local conservation district folks, those local NRCS folks, they're there, they really want to help. So please go see them and find out what they can help you with. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. It's our pleasure to work with you today. So lastly, if you're a certified crop advisor, we are offering 3 continuing education credits for attending Soil Health U. At the end of this event, a QR code will be placed on the screen and in the chat box. So if you have any more questions about the CCA continuing education, we're also going to have Kylie Reese contact information inside the chat box if you need to access that for her. All right, folks. Well, I think that the big moment is here. It is my pleasure to introduce to you our very first keynote speaker. Jimmy Emmons will be speaking to us today about the state of soil health. And although I have these grand visions of Jimmy walking on stage and having the lights and the music and, a standing ovation, we're going to do the best that we can do here on a virtual platform. So Jimmy is a familiar face to growers here in the High Plains and across Oklahoma. Jimmy Emmons is the regional coordinator for the Southern Plains FPAC within USDA and is also a 3rd-generation farmer rancher. Jimmy and his family own and manage 2,000 cropland acres and 5,000 rangeland acres in Dewey County, Oklahoma. In 2017, Jimmy's family received the inaugural Oklahoma Leopold Conservation Award, recognizing extraordinary achievement in voluntary stewardship and the management of natural resources. Jimmy serves as the president of the Conservation District and also sits on the board of directors for the Dewey County Conservation District. As FPAC Regional Coordinator for the Southern Plains, Jimmy oversees Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, and Kansas. Jimmy, thank you so much for being here with us today. The screen is yours.
Well, good morning, everyone. Glad to have you with us this morning. We'll get up and going here. So, the state of our soil 2020. So what does that really mean? Well, Jess asked me to do this based on the State of the Union address. And the State of the Union address was originally designed by George Washington to give the people of the United States a view of where the State of the Union was and how it stood. And since that moment, every president since then has done that. And it gives the people a real true feeling of where the country is at. And so today I'm going to try to bring a message of where we're at with our soils across the nation and really what that means and what we can and are able to do. And so we're going to start with looking at, why should we care, what the state of our soil is. Where did we begin? Where are we now? Where can we go? And are we going to choose regeneration or degradation? We've chose the latter for quite some time. So what can we do if we talk about regeneration? So we have to look at pre-settlement of the native prairie. Our soil organic matter range somewhere between 3 and 10%, give or take. Now that depends on where you're at in your soils and also your latitude and longitude and your climate. So there were soils that was higher than 10%, and there were soils that was in that 3% range. So it's a very wide array, but that kind of gives us a general sense of where we were when we started. And it looked much like this, with a lot of bison roaming across in the wintertime here, lots of cover on the ground. It also was very green and very diverse in the summertime. And so the herds of bison moved where the grass in the range was good, and they grazed it off and they moved on. So that's kind of a view of where we're at back then before we came along and settled the country. You know, the famous words, the rain follows the plow. Well, that was put out as settlement started across the prairie, and land people tried to convince everyone if you plowed the range up, then the rain would come. And it did in the early years. It was very good, but that was a very disastrous methodology. So as we look here, the rain does follow the plow straight down the range, straight down the hill with lots of erosion. And it continued. And if you look in the lower left corner there, that's a picture of the moon. And what have we done? We have really created quite the moon desert in lots of areas with heavy tillage and lack of understanding of soil function. And that's really key things that we have to zoom in on and try to understand. You know, we started very slowly. My granddad started with the horse. And we started, if you'll notice, this looks similar to the rangeland we saw, except now it's all tilled up and over the hills. But the rate of degradation was very slow because lack of horsepower. Then we started a little mechanization, tractors started coming in, but yet we're still didn't understand soil function and what we were doing. And if you can imagine today, if this was happening, if we got a large rain, what would happen in this type of scenario? We'd have lots of erosion, lots of nutrients moving around. And we have that. And I'm going to show that in the presentation here a little bit further. But once again, in the early days, we didn't understand that. We didn't have the knowledge that we have now. So, soil erosion from water. Now, this started happening as we broke out the prairie. We didn't understand, like I said, the function or the aggregation or how the whole system was designed. If you read a lot of the pre-settlement literatures from Lewis and Clark and others that travel across the country, most of the ravines, creeks, and rivers were very sloping, pretty shallow, easy to access. It didn't take long after settlement and breaking out the prairie that then the creeks and the rivers banks became highly eroded, very steep and very hard to cross. And you can see that if you really look at the journals and how people navigated across. I have a journal from a cattle drover that came up the Great Western Cattle Trail that comes through my property in 1876. And he wrote daily of his track across there. And I could tell when he got to our property on the Canadian River. And so as I read that journal, I understood what the terrain and what everything looked like in the 1870s. But yet we didn't understand the functioning of the soil. And here we go with lots of erosion along fence lines and down the steep slopes that we were trying to plow at that time. Well, along came this word called terracing. And really, that was a great concept and still is in certain situations. But you got to remember that this was only put in place to divert the resource out of the field. It did slow down erosion going straight down the hill, but then we diverted the water to the edge of the field, down a waterway, and in some more catchments. Once again, not understanding how to get the water in and keep it in was more designed to slow ditching, shrills, and all that down through the hills. As we look at soil erosion from wind, Now, in the 1930s, this was a big issue in the Big Plains. On May 12th in 1934, wind carried an estimated 200 million tons of soil from the southern plains to the Atlantic Ocean, clear to Washington. And this is really how Hugh Hammond Bennett started the Soil Erosion Service. He waited for that dust cloud to get to the Capitol and show everybody what was really going on the native plains. And, you know, it was just disastrous. I mean, we created this disastrous situation that was really horrific for the people on the plains. A lot of people perished due to dust pneumonia in big haboos like you're seeing here. This is a very famous photograph from Boise City, Oklahoma, not too far from where I'm at. And there's still huge mounds of soil in that area that's grassed over now that was caused from that great wind erosion in the 30s. And you would think that as this was happening, we would be thinking, you know, what can we do? But once again, we had limited knowledge of our soils back then and really the understanding of the functioning. As the wind blew, then we had this great concept, and they have great places, don't get me wrong. And then we put in shelter belts, once again, to divert a resource instead of understanding that all it needed was armor on the ground and good, great cover. That would protect our soil. But these wind shelter belts have a great place in today's agriculture in certain areas still, but now we understand what we can really do to the surface and the soil to really protect it. Now we move along to the 40s and the early 50s. And you'd think, you know, a few years went past, we're learning as we go. We went through these dirty 30s, as they were called. You know, can we do better? And then the drought of the 50s came along. And this is from Texas. And once again, we had the same terrible situation that was happening in wind erosion. Farmers and ranchers were just devastated, and they didn't understand what they could do. But yet we were still under the concept of cleaner is better. A weed growing out there is not good, so we want to keep it clean. But when it doesn't rain and the wind blows, then these disastrous situations started happening. And this was in the 50s. My dad talked a lot about the 50s because that's when he was really started to farming. And Granddad, of course, went through the 30s, come to our particular homestead in 1926 and bought the farm in 1934. So he was right in the middle of it. But my dad talked about in the 50s planting wheat 2 or 3 years and not even making enough seed to reseed the following year. So it's very dry time. Now on Emmons farms, my granddad started with horses and plowed for a while. My granddad wound up, the last tractor that he bought was an A John Deere in 1948. And as he would tell you, you know, we were walking in tall cotton then, sitting on something that would plow like this versus following the horse. My dad then went from that A John Deere to 30-20s and 40-20s. And then I remember the first cab 40-20 we had in the early 70s. And wow, we thought we were really doing something then. We had radios, air conditioning. We were in tall cotton. But then as I progressed and my dad progressed, this was the last new tractor that my dad bought. Got a 180 horsepower tractor. So you can see the progression that Emmons Farms went through. And then of course, Jimmy come along with the knowledge of Granddad and my dad that tillage was the king, clean was the king. You know, don't let a weed grow. The more you plow, the better it is. Once again, I didn't understand that concept of soil function and really how the community below our ground really worked and how we need to take care of that. So what did we do? We bought more horsepower as we went. I started with an 8450, an 8650. I wound up, right currently we have about 380 horsepower just to pull our big air seeder and stop it going down the road. So we've went a long ways since the beginning. But the bigger the horsepower got, the faster we could degrade the land. You know, that was what we didn't understand. And I want to make very clear that my granddad and my dad and anyone else in that era never intended to ruin their soil. They were doing the best they could do with the tools that was available for them and the knowledge that was being put out there. If they would have known, they would have never done what they done. But if you look at my granddad, he went from 1 horsepower to 25 horsepower in his lifetime. My dad then went from 25 horsepower to 160 horsepower. And then I went, my first crop that I put in at age 9 on a few acres of my own, I used the A John Deere to seed it. So I went from 25 horsepower to 380 in my lifetime. And that's, you know, that's the history of Emmons Farm as far as horsepower goes. But now we understand really what's going on and what we can do. Now we're going to move further into the future. On Halloween in 2019, a series of strong storms hit Pennsylvania, and in very few short hours, the Susquehanna River was flowing brown into the Chesapeake Bay in Maryland. Now, at that time, they had done great things in the Chesapeake Bay area of cleaning that up from erosion. A lot of no-till had come along, cover crops had come along. They were in the very forefront of regenerative ag in that area. But what they didn't understand was when organics came along, CRP came along, tillage started coming back into the picture. And this is what happened. And as you can see in this picture here, you can see the brown flowing down into the Chesapeake, into the Bay Area. Now with this, if you can imagine, if you had put chemicals out, if you put synthetic fertilizer out on your land, you know, where is it? Well, it's going down the stream. Also, we know now that in our soil, even if we don't put on synthetic fertilizer, nutrients are there. And so as that erosion happens, we're still can pollute the streams. So we can do better, and we can and are doing better in certain areas. But once again, this was in 2019. And remember, we started this back in the 20s and 30s. Then we roll around to June 2020. And, you know, Emmons Farms is really started in the last 10 years of really being on the regenerative side. We try to have cover crops in between. And so I've also assisted several producers across Oklahoma and other states trying to do better. Well, one day in June 9th of this last year, my hired man, my new term would be ag technician for Carson, and I were traveling to get parts. And we saw this happening, and this is about 35 miles from our home. And quite a dust storm was blowing. The wind was really bad that day, much like what we've had here in the past few weeks in the Great Plains. As we got closer, it's kind of like Will Rogers said, things can't go on like this, and they didn't. They got worse. And that's what we've done. Now, this is a good friend of mine. That's a great no-tiller, but he still doesn't understand soil function, cover, and the big 6 principles that we have nowadays. And once again, what's he doing? He has tillage out there trying to stop this dust storm. His mistake was he had planted sesame in here the year before, which is a very low residue crop. After harvesting sesame late in the fall, he chose not to do anything and left his land bare, then came in and planted cotton for this year. Now, last spring was extremely dry and his cotton failed. Well, what would happen if you've been months with bare soil in a dry condition and you get a big windy day? I want to show you something. As we were driving into this in the truck, This was the road. This is a state highway. And this is what we were looking at as Carson was starting to take pictures as we was driving in. And this is when we got into it. We could not see the blacktop road or the white line in front of us. It was a complete dark out. Later, within the hour, they closed the state highway for the rest of the day and had roadblocks. This particular producer had about 760 acres farms blowing that day and blocked several roads around the country. There were other producers as well, but he was by far the worst in this situation. Now, he felt terrible about this, and he's tried to be a good steward of the land, but yet he doesn't understand what cover and armor can really do for you. You know, and if you look what Charles Darwin said, it's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but it's the most responsive to change. Even Charles Darwin knew that people needed to change. And it didn't matter how smart you were or how strong you were, but you needed to have the ability to be most responsive to change if you wanted to progress. I think that's really key and critical as we look at things today. You know, many civilizations have come and gone from this earth because they didn't understand soil and they couldn't feed themselves. If you look at the Roman Empire, and if any of you have been over to Italy, they were some of the best engineers in the world. They built amazing things, great minds, great engineering. But yet, as they spread out and they destroyed their land, they couldn't feed themselves. So they kept spreading out until then they became very vulnerable to enemies, and they were actually taken over because they couldn't feed themselves and they were scattered out and they had destroyed their soils. We were over there just a few years ago, and things that amaze me as part of the aqueduct system, part of their sewer system in Rome is still in place from the Roman Empire. They still use it today. Very smart people, but yet did not understand their soils and what they could do. Now we're going to look at 2015, and this is some data from NRCS, and this is soil erosion in cropland and non-cultivated land. So 1982, we had this type of erosion happening in tons. Now, as you can see, we got better and continued to get better until in 2015, and we're trending up. Part of that, like I mentioned, was CRP was coming out. People wanted to plow again. Part of it was organics that, you know, you don't use chemicals, so how do you kill a weed? A lot of people still think you need to till that. Well, there is great things that you can do with no-till organics as well. But once again, we're still eroding a lot. Now, if you look at this slide, this is in billions of tons of soil that we're losing every year. Every year. And as you go down through the list here, you can see, once again, we started ticking back up here, but we're still losing 1.69 billion tons of soil down the hill, down the river, down to the Gulf, wherever you're at. Now, what does that really mean if we look at that and try to figure out how much really is that? So you take 1.69 billion tons, you divide that by 2 million pounds, that's a furrow slice per acre. A furrow slice is the top 6.7 inches of the soil. So if you have 1.69 million furrow slices, that's 70,416,666 semi-loads of soil at 80 feet long. Can you imagine standing in line at the elevator behind that many trucks? Well, if you really look at this, how many miles that is over 1 million miles of trucks, loads of soil that are destroyed. They're gone. You're not going to get that back. Now, the next great civilization's going to come along and maybe farm the ocean, much like we do here as this world changes. But why should we do that? So if you look at that 1.69 billion pounds of soil, and you divide that by the US population of 329 million people, that's 5.1 tons of soil per every man, woman, and child in the United States, per year. This is totally unacceptable scenario that we're still eroding this much soil today. So now, why should consumers care? They are starting to care, but why should they care? They should know how their food is being grown. Is it healthy? What chemicals are on that? What erosion? What synthetic fertilizer? This is us, that we're planting our garden here. Would you rather have this or have that clean soil that's eroded? I think consumers really need to understand soil stewardship. It's very critical nowadays that they understand that we can do better, and our food will be better if we do this. A totally functioning system, the food will be more nutritious. If you really look at David Thomas here, for 1940 to 1991, this is how much decline we had in nutrients of our meat. Copper was down 24%, calcium was down 41%, iron down 54%, magnesium, potassium. Some people would consider me overweight, which I am. But what does that really tell you is my body needs all these nutrients. So as I'm eating this food, if it doesn't have the nutrients in it, what does my body tell me? I need more. I'm still lacking. So as I eat more, what happens? Well, as you can see, what really happens. But, the point I'm trying to make here, and if we look at vegetables the same way, look at all the decline that we have from calcium, iron, riboflavin, phosphorus, protein. Yet our country is turning obese. And why? Well, because the food, meat, and vegetables that we're eating have lost their nutrient punch. And our bodies are still saying, I need a balanced diet. And the only way I'm going to get it is if I eat more. We really need to understand this concept if we're going to move forward in regenerative ag. I love this one. No matter how big a hammer you use, you can't pound common sense into stupid people. Now, I don't mean that we are stupid as producers. I don't mean that. But we have to do better. We have to learn and grow. I don't have this thing all figured out myself. And if I was to tell you that I knew everything about regenerative ag and our soil function and all the microbiology, I would be flat dead blind to you today. But I do know that I have to continue to learn, and there is a better way. Playing the long game is following the road less traveled by turning down what feels good now in favor of what we think will set us up for feeling awesome later on. We don't need to take the road that everybody else is on. We've been doing that for a long time. I've shown you here the progression since the 1930s, the 1950s, to the 70s, the 80s, 20s, to today. And what we're doing better. Don't get me wrong. We've made great strides from the 30s. But as you saw last year, we still have great wind erosion. I drove 14 hours from home to be out here with Dr. Kris Nichols and Rick Clark in Arizona to make this presentation today. I didn't see really one field that I was really blown away that I wanted to pull in and say, my God, I got to meet this guy. He's doing an awesome job. Now, that doesn't mean to say that between here and there, there's not great people doing great things. But if you really look on scale, we're not near where we need to be. So what can we do? 2017 agriculture census, and this is data from Oklahoma, where I'm from. I want to make that clear. This is not nationwide. This is from Oklahoma. And there's some very key points that I want to bring out. We had a 29% decrease in intensive tillage. Now that's very good. 29% of less heavy tillage is very good. We had a 24% increase in farms using cover crops. That's very good. We also had 51% increase in the acres using cover crops. So as you see, we can make a difference, and we can learn, and we can do more progressive things using all them 6 principles. That's very key to understanding soil function. Now, Drew Ewing was a grad student from the Clemson University, reached out to me. He was studying microbiology at Clemson, a very smart young individual. I really think a lot of Drew. Drew reached out to me and asked me if he could come to my farm. He'd been seeing some of the YouTube videos I put out and other people across the nation. YouTube and other media outlets that we have today has a very good way of communicating. And so Drew said, what I'm being taught is really not what you and others are saying in regenerative ag. And I need to come and see for my own eyes what's going on. And if really what you're saying is true. And so Drew came out and I took him to 3 different farms. This first farm I'm going to show you in his own words was a farm that I had put in a regenerative system, complete system approach with animals and all the principles about 4 years ago at that time. Then I took him to a neighbor's farm that is heavy tillage. I would call him a take-all farm. If it's something sticking up, he either wants to cut it off, bale it, or graze it off and leave it bare the rest of the year. Then I took him to the longest term field that I had in a regenerative system at that time, about 8 years. So as he left, he asked me what he could do to help me. And I asked him to put down in his own words what he saw that day. So the first field we went to, and this was on January in 2019, he saw a very dark brown from memory, close to a brunette brown for the first 5 inches with a marked change to a red clay. Now, where I live in Western Oklahoma, and most people will tell you that the soil in Oklahoma is red. Well, it can be, and it is where we've been using some of this. And the frost line base on the ice crystal sat about 1/4 inch that day. And we were freezing when he was there, but it's mainly on the surface, but it held its structure and was very carbon rich, and he could really very pliable. And so he noticed the very good changes that we were being made as little as 4 years. So then I took him to the neighbor's farm. Compacted red clay, characteristic of the region. He didn't have a chart that day for the red clay classification. It was very tough to get a sharpshooter in the ground. Mr. Emmons hopping with both legs on it. The frost layer went down 5 or 6 inches. The frost layer was inferred because when we lifted the shovel out, the bottom broke off about 5 or 6 inches with ice crystals on its underside. The red clay was frozen, difficult to break apart. It stuck to my hands once broken off, and he commented about how his hands got frozen as he was handling the soil. And if you notice there in the time frame, that was a little bit later in the morning as we were moving around from field to field. So then we went to the field longest end. The shovel went in with very little effort. Jimmy, I just barely used one hand to push the shovel in. Never reached the bottom of the carbon-rich soil. Soil color from memory was close to umber brown, ice crystal shallower than the first field. He thought maybe being down below elevation might have helped that a little bit, but he was able to crumble the entire column in his hands with very little effort, and stayed somewhat warm during this. And this was at 11:40 that morning. So that was Drew Ewing, his visual observation. And his dad was with him, and he asked me, he said, "This is mind blowing." He said, "Jimmy, can you explain to me in simple terms what we saw?" And I said, "Yeah, if you could imagine a gymnasium at a school, and you went in and they were having basketball practice, and only the players and the coach was in the gym. It'd been cold weather outside. They just turned the heater on as they went in there. So it was kind of cool, not unbearable. But as the activity started and practice started and everybody warmed up, it was comfortable, good enough. Now you went to the neighbor's field. This gymnasium had been setting all winter long. No one was there. The heat was turned off. As you went in, it was very cold. No activity going on. That was field number 2. As you went to field number 3, we were having a basketball tournament there, and the fire marshal said no one else can come in. We're at capacity. And what happens? You have to turn the fans on to keep everybody cool in there because there's so much heat coming out. That's what you saw in the biological world in these fields. The first field is only 4 years in. So maybe we're halfway there, fourth of the way there. I don't know, but we have activity going on, but not where we need to be. When we went to the neighbors, there was no activity. It is a dead soil, heavy tillage, heavy erosion, heavy chemicals, heavy synthetic fertilizer has shut the function completely down. The last field, we are really cooking now. We have lots of biological activity. And as they're working, even in cold conditions now, they have enough heat as they're working to still functioning. Now, they will eventually go dormant the further north you go, but the further south, they can stay alive and very functional. And that's what we were seeing that day. Consumers should be concerned, they should be watching, and they should be caring how we as producers are farming. I truly believe that. And if you really look today, they are starting to demand where their food is coming from, what's in it, how's it grown. You know, they really are starting to care. And that should be putting pressure on the market and demanding that we as producers do better. And we can. Trust me, we have the ability to really, really do better. Would you want a producer that's putting CO2 up in the atmosphere and letting all their water evaporate like this? And if you really are concerned about climate nowadays, we don't need any more CO2 in the air. So if you're a consumer, you should be watching and saying, hey, that guy is really not doing what he needs to be doing. Or would you want someone like this that's putting CO2 in the ground, raising that carbon level up, putting it back where it belongs, also keeping every raindrop where it falls? Trust me, people, this is the key as we move forward. We're going to look at my farm now in 2011. And NRCS had started helping me back in 2010. And this is on an irrigation field. I only have 2 irrigation pivots on my operation. We only had a 1/2 inch per hour of infiltration capability back then. If we put on more water than that, or it rained more than that, we had water running out of the field. And we knew that wasn't right. And we were starting to learn some of the basics then. And man, have we learned a lot since that time. Now, this past year, and we've done some really good infiltration tests on our farm with NRCS. Now, my original soil scientist is still with me all these years working on this project. So I had them come out this year to do some tests, but in 2012, we began a new frontier with our first cover crop. And since that day, I have planted cover crops in between our cash crops or companion cropping or interseeding cropping with my crops since then. Now to the test. We came out, we parked the pivot stationary and put on 7 inches of water in about 2 hours with no runoff or standing water. The water infiltrated down 5 foot deep. Now, this is the second time that we had done that. Previously, 2 weeks before that, I had done this exact same test, 7 inches, and as we were shutting it off and trying to see where, we were trying to figure out how fast water was infiltrating down. And as we was driving down through the field, and we were sloping about 2 to 3% in that field, I noticed that there was no standing water, no running water. And I told them, I said, we've got to measure this. This is huge. So they came back 2 weeks later, but also I was growing a corn crop, a double crop corn crop in between. And so I irrigated another 3 inches during that period. So we had 17 inches of water applied, and in 20 minutes, it had moved 5 feet deep. This is very, very important, people, that we understand what we can do, where we have been and where we're at now with this project. This is how we done it. This is how we documented it. We had a 4 foot ring in the ground. You see the rain gauge there. Them were GoPro cameras, one on the sprinkler, one stationary, and we filmed this as we were doing this. You can see in this first photograph, we just have an inch or so in the rain gauge. We ran that completely over. Now, if you look in the foreground here, you'll see just a smidge of standing water, and we're at almost the 7-inch level right now. And it is still going in at 17 inches in the last 2 weeks. Also, you'll notice the NRCS pickup setting there. We've got the rainfall simulator trailer hooked on, and we actually now have adapted that trailer so that we can simulate this same scenario in a dryland field as well. They drove out straight forward out that road back to the county road there with no issues. Why? Because that water had moved down through the profile so fast that the surface still wasn't saturated. Now, here's my soil scientist on the right, our state coordinator for soil health in Oklahoma, Amy Seegers, with me, and we're looking. And as you can really see here, there is a little line right there at Steve's hand that really caught our eye, and we were very excited about. And here it is. This on the right is what the surface used to look like on this field. On the left is the darkening layer and the carbon-rich soil that we've added onto the surface of this through good soil health systems. Now, this broke off here a little bit, and we like a little bit more here that I couldn't get all together. But we have moved this down in the last 9 years about 10 inches. And we see that quite common in Oklahoma, that if we're in a good functioning system, we can move this darkening layer down about 1 inch a year, give or take a little bit. So I really only like about 3 inches being down to the original plow pan of destruction in this field. So I'm going to get there in the next 2 to 4 years, depending on the weather. So this is what it looked like before. This is what it looks like now. This is what we can do. So then Steve, as he was looking at this, said, Jimmy, this is unbelievable. I think now that we can reclassify your soil. And I said, really? Okay, tell me about it. He said the original soil survey was mapped here was used to flue vent. They were a very young soil, and he stated that day probably 500 years along the river bottom there. Typically didn't have a very dark surface. They were heavy sand, loam, sandy loam, but he didn't see that 8 years ago. It's very light colored. Today, I saw a dark soil that we would call a molly, and I think we can reclassify that as a fluventic haptosoil, which means that's very rich carbon. Steve said, looks like you could be, according to your organic matter and where we've raised that from in that field, maybe 35,000 pounds of carbon you've added. You've also added aggregate stability, aggregate size. That's the reason you can move water so rapidly through the profile. So that told me that there's more to the pie than just the crust. What I mean by that, how important is soil aggregation to soil health? Dr. Kris Nichols is going to talk here in a little while, and she's going to really explain that, how important that is to understand aggregation. It's everything, beginning with improved infiltration, water holding capacity, carbon storage, and more nutrients. If we can get an 8 to 10 inch rainfall event and we can take it all in, or at least most of it, that provides multiple benefits. Future water to grow crops, more nutrients that stay in the field instead of going downstream. Our soil stays in place. It is very, very good for the world for us to understand that. Can we control runoff with organic matter? It's a great tool if we understand that and aggregation and how that all works together. If you look, and these are from Dr. Alan Williams, this will vary from location to location across the country. This is one snapshot in one place that Alan was talking. 2% organic matter would hold 32,000 gallons of water, or 21% of a moderate to heavy rainfall. Now, if you raise that organic matter to 5%, you can hold 80,000 gallons in that same field, or 53% of a moderate to heavy rainfall event. If you can get that to 8%, you can hold 80,000 gallons of water, or 85% of a heavy rainfall event. And like I said, that's Dr. Alan Williams. Folks, look at what you can do. Now, if you get an excessive hurricane event, big rainfall event, I'm not saying you can take everything in. The profile is only going to hold so much. But once again, it can hold it if we build it and build it right. In Steve Allsmall's career, that's my state soil scientist, he hasn't seen this kind of change very often. And it's only when a producer goes into a complete soil health management system. And I mentioned that several times today, and I really want you to understand that is key to get into a complete soil health management system. This is that corn this year. This is a double crop corn planted in July 12th, I believe was the date, behind harvested cereal rye crop. This has no synthetic no synthetic fertilizers at all on this. It's only had some compost tea extract, molasses, some humics, and some fulvics over the top. And so and if you look at that corn, you can tell it's not lacking for nutrients. And in a traditional system today, people would tell you this is not possible, that you have to apply more synthetic fertilizer than zero. I'll just tell you, they will tell you that. So I asked Steve, what are we seeing? And he says, this is living on the land versus the land living on you. This double crop corn behind harvested had no synthetic on it. My question to Steve was, what are we seeing? He said, you're seeing plants taking up ammonium and amino acid so they have more energy for growth instead of breaking down fertilizer. See, fertilizer has to go through the soil biology before the plant can use it. And we, at best, are only 50% efficient, at best. Then the world average is only 30%. So if you really want to put that in context, if you went to the filling station and filled your car up with $50 worth of gasoline and you got back in it and turned it on and it only showed a half a tank, would you be ready to leave if supposedly you'd filled it up? It would be totally unacceptable. But yet we're quite happy and very acceptable to take fertilizer out, throw it out, and at best get half of it. Most of the time we're going to get 30 to 40%. Ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in the moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands in the times of challenge and controversy. Dr. Martin Luther King. Folks, we're at that time that we need to understand how to measure ourselves, and we need to challenge ourselves. The state of our soil today, I'm going to give it a C minus. Now, you're saying, Jimmy, we're doing better than that. We do lots of no-till across the country. I have a great rotation. I plant corn and soybeans, or I'll plant wheat and maybe I do some cotton or some other crops. That is not a complete soil health system. We need to have animals on that if possible. And there's lots of opportunities now if you don't own cattle or animals. I'm a cattleman, so I always say cattle, just animals. Remember, the native prairie system had a diverse animal population on it. But a C minus is what I'm going to tell you is the state of our soil today. And some would tell me that I'm being very generous of that. Probably some would say it needs to be a D. But I'm telling you, we have made great progress since the beginning. And so I am going to give it that C minus. Dr. Rattan Law said soil stewardship and care must be embedded in every fruit and every vegetable eating, in each grain ground into bread consumed, in every cup of water used, in every breath of air inhaled, and every scenic landscape cherished. And I believe Rattan is right, that we have to apply great soil stewardship everywhere. Folks, we can do better. We can do better. We can do a lot better. And it's all in understanding. And Kris Nichols is really going to help you understand soil functioning. And then Rick Clark is going to come along and show you what really can be done in a good system. And so I'm going to leave you with a couple of thoughts here. I'm a huge John Wayne fan, and I've watched Westerns all my life. You know, and we've seen this several times in Western movies, that how do you stop a runaway stage? Well, John Wayne would have jumped from A to B to C to D to E to F and saved the lady in the stagecoach. Woohoo! I saw it 100 times. That was the only way to do it, isn't it? How else would you stop it? Well, there is another way. And I'm sure John Wayne and John Ford, the great movie director, never sat around having a glass of bourbon after they shot a movie and said, hey, Duke, you know, instead of risking your life jumping around from A to B, C to D to E to F, why don't you just shoot the horses and stop the stage? We can save a little money on production here. No, they never even thought of that. What I'm trying to make of this simple point is there are other ways to do things. Most of the time, we don't look at them because we're comfortable in doing what we've always done. And we have to ditch that idea. We have to throw it away. Sometimes we're carrying the answer with us, but we're just not looking in the right places to solve the problem. And I truly believe that. I'm going to leave you with this. Long live the soil. And if you look at this corner post, I drove by this corner post several times this past summer before I stopped and took this picture. There's no tillage on this. There's no fertilizer. And if you'll look at all the infiltration points, water can get in here. And I tell everybody, when you get your soil health system so great, Even Emmons farms can grow plants on their corner post. But folks, it's just a point to show you that Mother Nature can tell you what can be done, and you just got to observe and be willing to. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Jimmy. That was awesome.
Thanks, Jess.
Jimmy, I really thought that was great. I would like to congratulate you for the reclassification of your soils. I mean, that is just so impressive. And the work that you guys are doing down there in Oklahoma, and I know that you've got a lot of groups that support you and that are helping you along the way. So thank you very much for that.
You bet. It's an exciting moment. When Steve and Greg Scott told me that, I just about had to sit down on the tailgate of the pickup and absorb it, how quickly we have changed that, and that classification is very humbling. But it proves the point that even in an arid situation where we get, give or take, 20 some inches of rain, we're in a 20-inch rainfall, and literally we have went from 6 inches a year to 23 inches in the month of May. So it's give or take that much extremes, what we can really do if we apply the science that we have today.
You know, that's a really great point, bringing up the dry conditions that you guys experience. And just in the chat box, we are getting a lot of questions about dry environment. And just my observation is that's some of the hardest situations to manage when you're just getting started. So Jimmy, when you talk about creating a complete soil health management system, can you give us a little bit of support for those of us that are in the very dry conditions, even less rainfall than what you've got? What would you say to somebody just getting started?
So the drier you are, the more arid you are, the greater the challenge is. And there's two factors. Of course, it's always rainfall. You have to be able to germinate a plant to get it to grow. And this past summer, I will tell you that I actually had some cover crops die due to lack of rainfall. I had water in the profile. I just couldn't get them up and get the roots to grow down to the water quick enough in that arid environment. So it is very challenging. That doesn't mean it can't be done. I'm just saying that if it doesn't ever rain, it's eventually not going to matter. The key is you got to take the highs and lows out of that system and get it more even in the middle. So the drier, the hotter you are, the longer the biology is going to work year round. We can almost grow 365 where I'm at. Most of the time we can. Up north, you can't. So the biology shuts down. So it depends on where you're at, the bigger the challenge. But everybody loves a great challenge, and it can be done. And I think we're proving that it can be done. And I have producers in New Mexico and in Oregon State that get 6 inches of rainfall and are still able to plant a cover crop and still have a functioning system. It's just harder to do.
Yeah, and you talk about this happy medium, and that was another question from the chat box of balancing the living root and then also being able to still capture moisture for the next crop. Thinking a little bit on those terms, can you talk a little bit about your cover crop combinations? How has the selection of cover crops changed for you over the years, and what benefits or tips could you provide?
So the key to a cover crop mix is having it diverse enough that even in extreme times, something's going to grow out of that mix. This past year, as I stated, I had a lot die. I have about a 15 to 17 way mix that I use for summer covers. And I actually had some species that just couldn't handle that dry. But once again, I had planted some highly drought resistant, tolerable in there that was able to survive, and then provided great cover and great forage for the cattle later on. So it's trying to figure out what will grow in your area to the best of your goals. And we all need to set goals where we need to be, what we want them to accomplish. And on Emmons Farms, I like to have a plant, every plant that I plant, to have 3 purposes or 3 hopefully good outcomes, whether that's cover, armor, or freeing up some nutrients, or attracting beneficial insects, so flowering. And we also want to have different colors of flowers. So I really want that very diverse in that mix so that we have them outcomes of each species in there. And you're going to have to tailor that mix for your area because we all are in such very different environments, where it be moisture, climate, soils, latitude, longitude. That's something that you as an individual has to figure out. Start with the basic and then learn and grow from there.
Yeah, I think that's really key on that point, Jimmy. And we've had a lot of questions in the chat box, just talking about the extended dry periods and the effects of tillage on microbial activity. And I know that Kris is going to talk a lot about that in her presentation. But just what observations do you have about the soil biology as you get into this healthy soil system? And give us some, what are some visual examples? What are some outcomes that you've realized because of increased biological activity? And then how did you achieve it?
So I like to give a simple observation. In Oklahoma, we're kind of in Tornado Alley. And if you really look at, now you got to remember that all creatures, all living things on the planet Earth function the same way. We all have to have water, we all have to have food, and how we function, and we have to have air, and we exhale out. It doesn't matter where I'm a micro, little bitty thing that you can't hardly see with 500 power, or an elephant. We all function the same. If a tornado goes through a town, what does it do? It destroys the entire functioning system. There's no power, there's no water, there's no sewer, there's no homes. If you're tilling a field and you have a biological community under the ground, what do you do to their community? You destroy it. You destroy the way they're functioning, you destroy their air, you destroy their house. So it's much similar, the same scenario. And that's what we've got to really think about. What are we doing with that? And everything we do on the land has an impact. Mm-hmm. So we must think of that and try to make that a positive impact instead of a negative one.
Absolutely. And soil aggregation will also be a theme of this conference. So Jim, we have about a minute and a half left. A really good observation from your presentation and also with your work with FPAC. You mentioned the recent consumer emphasis on climate change mitigation. So in your observation, will there be room in regenerative agriculture in the government programs to a greater extent in the next USDA? And
yes.
Will we see an emphasis on nutritional guidelines for regen in regards to consumer advice in the grocery store? So can you give us an update from your observation?
Yeah, I really believe that the new administration is really going to focus on climate change and carbon storage and what we can do. And regenerative ag fits that window perfectly. And as we do that, then the food will get better. And they're zeroed in on food quality too. But we're pumping dollars into a lot of the programs, but we're going to have to really focus them dollars more in on regenerative ag and what can be done. We've got a great start. Are we there as a government? No, we're not. But we've got a great start and we're headed down the great path here. And yes, we as regenerative producers across America should be excited of what we can do and the opportunities that could come here in the future.
Absolutely. And just like what the chat box mentioned, Shane mentioned that just working with producers to make sure that it's not a one size fits all approach, that it's actually a systems based approach to agriculture that is also place based in everybody's geography. So that's kind of a good way to look at it. All right. Well, we have hit the 9 o'clock hour and I wish I could just give you a standing ovation, Jimmy. We need Zoom functions for applause, but everybody in the chat box are giving you applause. And we thank you for being here, Jimmy, and sharing your morning with us. All right, so this is really great. We're going to copy and paste the schedule into the chat box. We're going to have a keynote presentation right now with Dr. Kris Nichols, and then from there, we're going to follow up with a little bit of information for everybody about our sponsors and some really awesome awards, and then we'll go into Rick Clark's presentation. So for right now, I just want to make an observation that we are so happy that all of you have decided to spend your morning with us. And I'm watching the chat box, and we have people from all over the world joining us. I've seen Europe, France, I've seen our friends over in Australia. And so just thank you to all of you that are here with us and supporting us. We are just very, very happy to be here. So folks, Jimmy gave us the state of soil address, and I found just a lot of information in there to be thought-provoking. And not only do we have a lot of work ahead of us, but I also feel great hope in the situation that we have in front of us. I truly believe that by doing all of the work that we're doing right now, all of us together, learning about soil health, learning from our peers, learning from our different conservation folks that are there to help us, we're going to advance the needle for soil health. So in that, I would like to introduce to you our next speaker, Dr. Kris Nichols. She is the leader in the regenerative ag movement to regenerate soils for healthy crops, food, people, and the planet. She is the research director for My Land Company, LLC in Phoenix, Arizona, and she is also the principal and founder of Knowledge for Regeneration and Innovation in Soil Systems Education and Consulting. Such an important fact here. So in recognition of her work, Dr. Nichols has received several awards, including the 2012 Conservation Research Award from the International Soil and Water Conservation Society. And today, Kris will be bringing us a presentation reviewing regeneration and the toolbox for adoption of soil health practices, which is just incredibly timely right now. So Dr. Kris Nichols, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, and we look forward to hearing your presentation.
As Jessica mentioned, I'm going to be talking about soil regeneration and the importance of soil regeneration. And what I want to do this morning is take you on a little bit of a virtual journey. So we're going to do a virtual journey as a soil microbe. So this is a microbial story that we're going to be taking and following when we look at regenerating soil. So what does this mean to the microbial community? And when we talk about regenerative agriculture and regeneration, we're really talking about an innovative, integrated, dynamic system where you have soil organic matter and soil biodiversity and the content of the soil microbial community that is charging that dynamic system. And when we're talking about an innovative, integrated, and dynamic system, it is that integration of the microbes, the plants, and the animals, and they're responding dynamically, so that they're in response to various types of conditions and different things that may be happening, as opposed to being very consistent in what they're doing. So they're able to respond on demand and when the needs are out there by the plants, the animals, and other microbes that are going to be in part of the system. And we're looking at this as a system. I keep saying system because it is a holistic system in which we can incorporate grazing, we can incorporate the use of insects, and we can incorporate the use of microbes, of birds and bats and bees and all of these other types of organisms into that system. And in this system, we're going to be focusing on the problem, not the issues that you have. So I'm going to introduce you to what I see as the problem in agriculture, and I want you to be focusing on that and then utilize that to be able to address the various types of issues that you might be seeing. But it's really focusing on the problem. And we're going to do that, and when we do that, we're going to be able to improve the water cycle and the fertility, as Jimmy was pointing out and discussing, and we're going to enhance the resilience and the nutritive quality, which Jimmy also mentioned earlier. And how we're going to do this is we're actually going to utilize the power of photosynthesis. We're going to look at things on a subatomic and atomic level of energy flow. But we don't have to understand chemistry and physics and biology completely. Actually, none of us really do understand that. But what we are going to be doing is thinking about how the energy, how the carbon is going to flow through the system. So the energy flow from the sun through carbon into plants, microbes, and animals. And that is in an interwoven, complex, yet elegantly simple, repeated pattern matrix design. So Jimmy mentioned all biology follows the same types of rules. And that's what it is that we're going to be doing, is that repeated pattern of these rules as we become microbes in the soil. So when we talk about what the problem is, I think that we have one problem in agriculture, and that problem is that we do not have enough soil. And what I mean by this is that soil is carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, or organic matter, bound to sand, silt, and clay. We've got plenty of sand, silt, and clay, but what we don't have is enough organic matter in that system. So what we need to be focusing on in regenerative agriculture is really the idea of regenerating soils. So this isn't agriculture as much as it is soils. And soils and agriculture, to a certain degree, are synonymous, because you cannot have agriculture without having soil. And so we're going to be utilizing this idea as the foundation for what it is that we're going to do. If the problem is we don't have enough soil, that's what we need to be looking at, how we can regenerate that. And how we're going to do this is we talk a lot of times about these soil health principles that we have. And these soil health principles are really important for us to be thinking about creating a platform for what options and opportunities, what tools we can put into place, the management practice and tools that we can utilize in order to be able to get this to function and work. And we're going to be utilizing these principles where we're going to be optimizing the landscape use. You're going to look at your farmscape and figure out what we can do with different areas on the field. We're going to be maximizing the efficiencies of these processes and practices, and we're going to be doing more with what we have, so that we're able to actually not actually have more, but we're going to not do more, but we're going to actually do less as individuals, because we're going to be leveraging the risk and the activities across billions of different organisms in the system. So as opposed to you having to do all the work, we're actually going to allow for the system to be able to do the work. And that's going to allow us to have multiple enterprise systems where we're going to be able to get gains from different areas and different layers. And we're going to be looking at this in a way in which everything, this isn't magical. It isn't that we're all of a sudden going to be able to have a number of different things that are going to be occurring here. It isn't magic that this is just going to happen. It is actually, there are costs, there are trade-offs. Everything costs, but you need to be looking at the trade-offs within the system to figure out how we're going to get this to work. And we're going to redistribute the risks, like I said, across billions of different organisms, which is going to allow the system overall to be more profitable. So I've got these 6 soil health principles, and somebody will be like, 6? I thought there were 4 or maybe 5 if we do livestock, but there are actually 6. And the 6th principle, I think, is one of the most important principles. And what I've done here is I've put these 6 principles in a pyramid design. And I did this for a few very important reasons. One, so this looks like a triangle initially, and it actually is a pyramid in this imagery. But the idea behind a pyramid design is, first off, pyramids have stood for thousands of years. And the reason they have stood for thousands of years was when they were built, every stone and every layer was specifically placed to have a role and to help to support all of the rest of the infrastructure. And so when we look at the principles that we have and the tools that we can put into place, the tools and practices are those stones. And so we put the tools and practices in place so they're helping to support every other component of that pyramid, of being able to support the system. And we're going to do this by, again, putting these principles in place. And the other thing with a pyramid design is that this is not about hierarchy. The layers at the bottom are no more important than the layers at the top. This is all about, again, how things are going to be integrated together. And I want you to think about this again with the pyramid standing for thousands of years, because I want you and your family to not be celebrating century anniversaries on your land, but I want you and your family to be celebrating millennial anniversaries. I want you to be able to have this soil for thousands of years, because that's what it is that we need to do. So when we think about the principles, the four main ones that have been discussed for a long period of time are things like maximizing photosynthesis, keeping it green and growing, energizing with diversity, having a diverse crop rotation, integrating diverse cover crops, those things like that, reducing or eliminating tillage, and having the armor or the protection on the soil surface. Now, the one that's in the middle there, and again, I didn't strategically place this in the middle, but the one that's in the middle, we've got two of them that they're additional ones. One is the managing livestock, which is the fifth one that people talk about, but the other one is to reduce or eliminate synthetic inputs. And this is a key one, again, that we don't ever really talk about, but it's one of the most important things that it is that we're going to do, especially if you're going to be a microbe. If you're going to take this journey with me on being a microbe in the system, what is it that is the impact of not addressing these principles on your health and well-being as a microbe? So what we're going to do is we're going to treat the soil, or we're going to treat the microbes in the soil like they're humans. Again, Jimmy mentioned biology follows all of the same types of rules. So if we're going to be healthy humans, one of the principles to being a healthy human is to eat small meals throughout the day, to be a grazer, to not do feast and famine type of eating, and also to eat a diverse diet. So when we're thinking about this, again, going back to the soil health principles, this is maximizing photosynthesis, or keeping it green and growing, having food going into the soil for as long as possible, and then eating the diverse diet is that diversity that you're going to have in that system. So we're going to focus on those two first. I know there are four of them that are listed here, and we'll get back to them. But what I want us to do first is focus on the whole idea of eating small meals throughout the day, being that grazer, continuously having the food going into the system, so reducing feast and famine, and eating a diverse diet. So how do we go about doing this, and how do we think about this as a microbe? So here I've got some images of mycorrhizal fungi, and mycorrhizal fungi literally means myco is the Greek word for fungus and rhiz is the Greek word for root. So they are literally fungus root fungi. And these were the things that help to make soil. So again, if we're going to go back and say that we have our problem is that we don't have enough soil, we need to actually think not just about regenerating soil, but about originating soil. How did soil come into being? And since soil is carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen bound to sand, silt, and clay, it's that organic matter. We didn't have soil without plants, and we didn't have land plants without fungi. This relationship has existed since we had the first plants on land. And we didn't have animals on land until we had plants on land. We had to have that photosynthetic activity of fixing carbon, utilizing the power of the sun, and taking that energy and putting it into those carbon bonds. And so that's how we got soil to begin with. And that was done in an aquatic environment originally. So you had life in the aquatic environment, and in that aquatic environment, you had a cyanobacterium, a pre-algal type of organism. So we had a pre-plant, and then you had an organism that was like modern day mycorrhizal fungi. And that fungus would help that pre-plant, that bacterium, to actually acquire nutrients from that aquatic environment. It would help to obtain not just things like nitrogen and phosphorus, but also elements like copper and iron and zinc that were important in the photosynthetic process that help to create the enzymes that are needed for photosynthesis. And so the fungus helped that bacterium get those nutrients so that it could do more photosynthesis. And then the bacterium fed the fungus carbon in exchange for that. And that, as that happened, that was far more efficient than each of them doing it alone, doing those processes alone, so that they could work together. And when they worked together, that efficiency allowed their population to grow and expand. And as their population grew and expanded and they washed up on shore on to the land, which was a mineral matrix of sand, silt, and clay, they started to build up and they started to wash up on top of each other. And so the bacterium that was at the bottom now had to have a different job because it couldn't get access to sunlight. So as the organisms built up on top of each other, the bacterium at the bottom created roots. Those original roots were basically anchoring structures so that as the organisms built up, layering on top of each other, you wouldn't fall over. It was basically a way, and that's what roots, the primary goal of roots in modern day plants is to prevent lodging. It's to keep the plant from falling over. And the primary goal of the fungus in this relationship was to help to get nutrients to work with other bacteria and fungi and other organisms that were on this mineral matrix to help to get the nutrients from that environment and deliver that to the roots. So the pictures there that are black and white, those pictures are actually pictures of mycorrhizal fungi in fossilized plants. So in some of the first plants that we had, 450 to 500 million years ago, we had mycorrhizal fungi. And then the picture that the fungus is colored in blue, that's a picture that I took a few years back. And you can see that they look very, very similar. So you've got these similar types of complex that's there. So the next thing that I'm going to do here is that we are going to take a look at the fact that we've got this system that is going to be relying on photosynthesis. It's going to utilize photosynthetic activity in order to be able to work. Now, I'm going to pause here for just a second because I'm having a technological issue. It appears that my headset is running out of charge. So I'm going to unplug it and I'm going to go on. So sorry about that. This is what I get for last night. I didn't charge my headset, and I realized that when I got here, and I realized that I had the charger left in my house. So sorry, but we'll go on. So what we're going to be doing is, again, we're going to be starting with photosynthesis. We're going to take that energy that's in the sun and we're going to utilize that energy to convert carbon into these bonds between carbon atoms and other carbon atoms, or carbon atoms and other atoms. And that's going to store that energy from the sun. And that energy and that carbon is actually the building blocks for all life. Almost all life on planet Earth is carbon-based, and that carbon comes from, again, this photosynthetic activity, either directly or indirectly. So we have to have photosynthetic activity to have all of the plants and the animals and the microbes as part of this system. So what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be, again, wanting to think about organic matter. And organic matter is a very small component of the overall soil matrix, but it's a very important component of the overall soil matrix. It controls about 95% of the activity that's there. And within that organic component, the circle in the center, basically within that organic component, you have a very small amount that is the microbial biomass. That are these other organisms that are in the soil, the bacteria, the fungi, the actinomycetes, protozoa, microarthropods, nematodes, all of these different types of organisms that are there. They're a very small amount of the overall amount of the soil, but again,
95% of the function of soil is controlled by these organisms. So we need to be able to have them be a part of that system. And what these organisms are going to do is these organisms are going to work together. This was a paper that was published in 2017, and it shows how these organisms are all, you see all the lines that are connecting these organisms. And these lines are basically demonstrating the relationships between the organisms. The spheres are indicating the size, the number of different species that are within these groups. So obviously the bacteria, which is that red sphere, that sphere is the largest sphere because the number of different species in the bacterial group is the largest. And then you have the fungi, and by biomass, by overall amount, physical amount, even though they're the most numerous as far as the number of species and the number of individuals, by biomass, fungi are the largest amount of biomass that you have in the soil. And so these fungi are that blue sphere that's there. Now, what you have here is you have these lines that are connecting, showing the relationships. So the size of the line is basically indicating the number of different relationships that you have. So if we look, this again, that width of that bar, if you look at the bottom with the key that's there, the width of the bar indicates the number of different interactions. And between the bacteria and the fungi, you could have more than 9,000 different interactions that are happening here. So they're acting as consortia. They're acting in these very intimate relationships. So when you're a microbe, we're going to be microbes here for the rest of the presentation. And when you're a microbe, you aren't just living by yourself. You've got all of your buddies, all of your friends hanging out together. One person is going to go to the fridge and get the steak out, and another person is going to grill the steak, and another person's going to make the vegetables, and all of this interaction that's going to be occurring in here. And the colors of these lines are basically indicating the percent of the interactions, the strength of the interactions between those two groups. So the fungi and the bacteria have some very strong interactions that are there, but actually there are stronger interactions between the bacteria and the mites. And one of the reasons that this exists is that for many of the mites that you have, the bacteria are a major component of the guts of the mites. So the mites don't actually consume, just like macroscopic insects, the mites are microscopic insects. So just like the macroscopic insects aren't consuming food on their own, they're actually working in the guts of the bacteria are working in the guts of these mites in order to be able to process food. So for example, I'm going to tell you that termites don't eat wood. They've never, ever eaten wood. What termites do is termites chew the wood. The things that eat the wood are actually the bacteria that are in the guts of termites. So the bacteria break down, they eat and consume that woody material, and then those bacteria are going to poop, just like every organism poops, gives up waste. And that poop is actually what goes in to the bodies of the mites. So just like us, we don't actually, we have make a steak, you eat that steak, you're the chewer of that steak. But what goes into our bloodstream and in our bodies is not the steak. It is from our gut microbiome. The microbes are going to consume that steak, and then they're going to be releasing things like the nitrogen and phosphorus and sulfur and iron and zinc and the elements that we need and the carbon that we need to be able to live. And they're going to do that when they make waste. So we actually eat poop. That's what we do as organisms. So we've got these organisms that are a part of the system. And when we're looking at these organisms that are there, so that you get an idea of what you're going to look like as a microbe, we're going to start this video where these are ciliates. So this is a very large magnification. So now we've zoomed in on the ciliates, and I'm going to back that up for a second. because we're going to be ciliates that, so we've got the ciliates running around here, and now we're going to zoom in, and now we're ciliates having sex. So those two ciliates that are joined together, they're conjoined and they're exchanging DNA. You've got ciliates again that are here. We've got algae, we've got paramecium, we've got rotifers and nematodes, and you can see the vacuole on the rotifer. That vacuole that's in the center there, that is actually pushing bacteria. So you can see now they've got cilia or hairs, and that's going to create a current that's actually going to drive the bacteria that you can't see into their bodies. The same thing is going to be happening here with the nematodes. They're consuming bacteria. So you can hardly see the bacteria. Those are the tiny dots that are around there. And sometimes you'll see those sort of shaking and moving. But the idea is that you can basically think of yourself as being one of these microbes. What is it that you're going to do, and how is it that you're going to live? So you can be a fungus or a ciliate or a bacterium or a nematode or a protozoa or an alga, anything that you want to be. And I want you to be thinking about that for the rest of this presentation, because you're going to be living life like a microbe. And so the first thing that you're going to be doing in living life like a microbe is we're going to talk about where you're going to live, what this is going to look like. And so I've got a couple of different pictures here. These are both from near Glasgow, Montana. I was going to give a presentation in Glasgow, and I stopped and along the way, and it just so happened I drove by these two farms in the middle of Montana. And on one side of the road, you had one field that you could see had the, dark, rich soil that would be there and had soil. And on the other side of the field, you had dirt, you had the mineral matrix. And what's the difference between the two? One had been tilled up and the other had not. The other had had crops that were growing on it for a longer period of time and a no-till type of system. So what we've got here and the graph below is from Rattan Lal, and it basically shows that as we started tilling up the prairies, we lost that organic matter, we lost soil. And when we lost the soil that was there, we lost, again, that ability to be able to have a place for the microbes to live, because the microbes would live in this great environment that you have. Would you like to live in that environment that has the dark, rich soil, or do you want to live in dirt? If you're a microbe, you're going to be far happier where you've got the soil and the organic matter, the food next to you in order to be able to support your growth. So when we lose that soil, we're losing the microbial activity that we can have in the system. And the microbes are going to grow in different layers and different environments in the soil. They're going to be growing, they create and engineer their own habitats. They create their own habitats, soil aggregates. And the soil aggregates that you have, that environment that they've engineered, inside the soil aggregates, you're going to have bacteria and fungi, and then outside the aggregates, in between the aggregates, becomes the home for protozoa and nematodes and microarthropods. And that's a good home for the protozoa, nematodes, and microarthropods, because between those aggregates, you're going to have the pore space that's going to allow for water to be able to move in. And the protozoa and the nematodes and the microarthropods need to have water films to be able to move in and on. And when we increase the pore space in our soil by 45%, it increases the infiltration rate of the first inch by 167%, and more importantly, the second inch of water by 650%. And so as Jimmy was showing you earlier, our ability to be able to get water into the soil and hold on to that water is dictated by the pore space that is dictated by the aggregates that are engineered by the microbial community. So you get these structures that are going to be formed by the microbes, those houses for them to be able to live in. Now, again, I mentioned that one of the things we're doing is we're going to treat the soil like we're supposed to treat ourselves. And we don't want to have this feast or famine type of activity. And so what we're going to do, the most important job that you as a farmer or rancher has, is to harvest sunlight. That's what your true crop is. That's what you're harvesting. And so the more days of the year you can be harvesting sunlight, creating those carbon bonds, the more soil you're going to regenerate and the more profitability you're going to be able to have, because you're creating that soil environment. You're allowing for the system to engineer soil aggregates and create porosity. You're allowing for the system to be able to feed the microbes and all of the different organisms that are there. And so what I want you to be thinking about is, for the most part, pretty much everybody that's on the call, I can guarantee, lives in an environment in which the sun shines 365 days of the year, right? I don't think there's anyone, I could be wrong, Jess, but I don't think there's anyone on the call that doesn't live in an environment that the sun doesn't shine. There may be some people from Scandinavia, and nice to have you on the call, but for the most part, most of us live in an environment in which we have 365 days of sunlight. But we, as farmers and ranchers, we only think about the fact that we have maybe 90 to 120 to 130 days. That's our growing season. If our job, if the crop we're harvesting is sunlight, and you're only harvesting that crop, you're only managing that crop for 90 to 120 to 130 days, that's a lot of days off. That's a lot of starvation that you're doing to that environment. And so I want you to think about the fact that we can have a minimum of harvest time, a minimum of harvesting our true crop or sunlight of 260 days. If you have 365 days of sunlight, you have 260 days of harvest time, minimum. And I say minimum because that's still giving you 105 days off. That's a long vacation. It's a long starvation time for the system. And for producers like Jimmy that's in Oklahoma that are closer to the equator, you're going to want to be pushing that 365. You're going to be wanting harvesting the sun at least 320, if not 350 to 360 days. And we can do this, but we have to think about things differently. And the first thing we have to think about differently is the fact that for the plants aren't like us. They don't have a nervous system. And so they don't sense temperature in the same way that we do. They're not going to utilize temperature in that same way, so that they don't need to again, they have different biochemistry that at different times they're adapted to different temperature regimes. But because they don't have a nervous system, it doesn't mean that every plant shuts down completely and won't restart when we have temperatures that go above 100 degrees or temperatures that go below zero. We're having that ability to be able to have that broad temperature range that a plant can be able to survive. And so what we need to be thinking about is, again, selecting the right types of plants for that environment. Not necessarily always looking for new plants and new crop breeds, but actually looking at some of the old plants, at some of the indigenous plants, what was growing there before. And when we do this and look for plants that are going to be growing for at least 260 days, it is allowing us to have a greater level of diversity. We can have additional crops. We can do things like relay cropping or double cropping or polycropping, which is going to allow us to extend the growing season and have a continuous amount of crops that we can raise and market. But we can also have things like perennials and annuals mixed together. We can utilize the ability to be able to continuously have something that's growing. And again, if we choose the right plants, yes, there may be some plants that may go into a dormant phase when the temperatures get too low or too high. But the minute that the temperatures change, you're going to see them growing again. And so a couple of years ago, I did what we called the Winter Green Challenge up in Canada. And we basically had producers go out and take pictures of when they had green plants. And they would send them in, and then we were holding a workshop, and they got a free registration to the workshop, whoever sent in the most photos for the most number of days. And what we got was we had pictures, we had well over about 500 pictures, And what we got was pictures that covered pretty much every day of the year. And this was up in Canada. So we would get green plants that could be growing no matter what the conditions were. So it's about choosing the right plant. And when you're a microbe, if you're going to be this microbe today on the microbial journey, having food that is going to be coming to you every day is what it is that you need to have. Again, 260 is not enough. That's 105 days that I have to starve. I'm not going to be happy. I'm not going to reproduce. I'm not going to function very well. I'm not going to build soil aggregates. I'm not going to create that structure that's needed if I have to starve 105 days. I don't have the energy to be able to do that work that it is that you're asking for me to do. So the other thing that we're going to think about too is not just making sure that we're feeding the microbes so many days of the year and that we're feeding them a diverse diet, but we need to exercise to be healthy. And what does that mean when we're talking about the soil? When we're talking about exercising, we're talking about the frequency, the intensity, the scale, and the timing. And with the soil, those factors are very important because the exercise that we're going to want to do for the soil is we need to drive the microbes to do their job. Everybody works for food. Jimmy mentioned this. We've all always worked for food. We've forgotten this because we've replaced food with colored paper and metal coins. But the reality is we've all always worked for food. That basic carbon, again, drives everything that we do. And so if we're asking for the microbes to do these jobs, to help with nutrient acquisition and delivery, fixing various types of nutrients, mineralizing nutrients, creating a pipeline for delivery, we're asking them to help manage water, infiltration rates, retention, water use efficiency, acquisition, delivery, creating soil aggregates, helping with managing populations in order to be able to manage pest and disease relationships, in order to be able to have these consortia we talked about before, having predator and prey relationships, having competition for food, all of these types of activities we're asking the microbes to do. And all that they're asking for from us is that we feed them, that we don't give them periods of starvation. So we need to be able to have this coming into the system. And when we give them periods of starvation, we're not going to be able to have the system function as well. So one of the things that's going to be missing within the system functioning is this water use efficiency. And I love this. This was an article that was reprinted in 2000 in Acres magazine. It was actually a study that was done by Dr. William Albrecht back in the 1950s. And what he said, what this article is titled, is The Drought Myth. And the idea is that he found that it wasn't a case of a lack of water, but it was a case of a lack of fertility or nutrients that caused a decline in crop production. And it also required, in addition to it causing decline in crop production, so the yield was decreased, but it also required a lot more water for the corn to even be able to try and grow when the nutrient level wasn't high enough. And so this was actually one of the things that created the foundation for the conventional high input system that we have today. This was utilized to basically justify the fact that we need to input a lot of nutrients in order to be able to have the yields that we need to have. Now, the thing with this study is that Dr. Albrecht didn't really say that it had to come from synthetic fertilizer. It was about nutrients. It wasn't about where those nutrients came from. So we can resolve some of these issues when it comes to nutrients by actually working with the biology that's part of the system. We found this in North Dakota. I worked in North Dakota for about 14 years. We found this in North Dakota where we would have a cover crop mix, a 7-way cover crop mix that was yielded 3 times the amount as a single crop. on the same amount of moisture. So the crop that had this mix with the mix of plants, which stimulated a mix of microbial activity and a mix of microbes, actually was more efficient at getting nutrients, which means that it utilized less water. And so we're going to do this by, again, increasing the efficiency of the microbial activity that you have. And as Jimmy mentioned, one of the big issues that we have in our system is that the plant availability of nutrients and the plant nutrient use efficiency has been declining. So the top graph here actually shows we've seen an increase in yield. So that, again, was driven by this idea that we increase the amount of inputs that we have into the system, and we need that to increase yield, which we did. We increased yield over time. But the bottom graph is a graph of nutrient use efficiency, in this case, nitrogen use efficiency. And that graph is showing how we've gotten that dropped off. That's declining. And so what this indicates is that it actually takes more nitrogen fertilizer today to produce a bushel of grain than it took in 1960. I'm going to repeat this because this is important. It takes more nitrogen today to produce a bushel of grain than it took in 1960. Regardless of our genetics, regardless of the tools we've done for fertilizer placement, regardless of what we've done to make more efficient fertilizers, it takes more nutrients today than it took in 1960. And this is because I don't think that the issue is that the plants have gotten that less efficient. What it is that in 1960, we had more of the microbial community. So the plants have always and will always get more nutrients, at least 50 to up, I would say up closer to 70 to 80% of the nutrients the plant needs has to come from the activities of the microbial community and from the soil. And so when we reduced the amount of microbes because we added the nutrients, this is the exercise. So when you add the nutrients, and for the plant, those nutrients, those synthetic nutrients are free to the plant. So the plant gets those nutrients for free. It doesn't have to give carbon to a microbe in order to be able to get those nutrients from the soil. It doesn't have to purchase those nutrients from the soil. So for the plant, it's free. Why would the plant give those nutrients? Why would the plant give that carbon to the microbial community? And when the plant doesn't give that carbon to the microbial community starves. So if we make the plant do some work by having to give carbon to the microbial community, by reducing the amount of inputs we have in the system, the plant then gives the microbial community carbon, which is now allowing for that microbial community to get fed and grow. And what's happened since 1960 is we outsource the jobs of the microbes. When your job gets outsourced, you don't have the ability to buy food. When you don't have the ability to buy food, your population declines and you have to go into a resting stage. And when you're in a resting stage, it's easy for you to die, to get attacked by something else, or to not survive the conditions you're exposed to. And so your population declines. And so now today we're paying the cost of the fact that in 1960, we started adding all of these nutrients and outsourcing the jobs of the microbial community, and they went away. And so now that 70 to 80% of the nutrients that they would normally get from the soil, they're having to get from synthetic inputs. And they can't do that as efficiently as the microbial community could, adding those nutrients. So we're going to go through this relatively quickly. And basically what we're looking at is improving efficiency. So above ground, when we look at this, you have, as the sun passes overhead, you have leaves that are on the trees, and those leaves are on branches, so that as the sun passes overhead, you always have a leaf that is going to be able to get in contact with sunlight. And that's going to allow for enough photosynthetic activity throughout the day to help to support that whole entire growth of the plant. Now, if we flip this below ground, you've got the plant with the taproot, and then you've got the roots coming off of that plant. And those branches are going to allow for the plant to be able to obtain the nutrients that are right around the branches. And that's what the plant can access. So I've got nutrients that are here that are in a plant available form that are right around the roots. But in reality, there's a lot more nutrients that are in the soil. And the microbial community can make those nutrients available to the plant. But again, when the plant can only access them by the roots that are there, the nutrients that are off in the corners, further away from the roots, those are not going to be nutrients that are going to be picked up. So the plant could actually put on more branches, but you're still not efficiently reaching out to where the nutrients are. So for the same amount of carbon that you could put into putting branches, you could feed the mycorrhizal fungi. And now they're able to grow and tap into and obtain those nutrients and access a much larger amount of the nutrients and the water that's in the soil. And that's going to allow, again, for greater use of efficiency. When we're talking about profitability in your system, the profitability is based on how efficient the system is going to function. If we're relying solely on those roots to be able to access the nutrients and water, that's not very efficient because you can only get access to what's right around you. So again, you put a small amount of energy, a small amount of carbon into feeding the microbial community, and now you're much more efficient at getting out there and getting access to more nutrients. One of the other things that can happen with maximizing this efficiency is this interplay of transfer of various nutrients between the plants. And this is one of my favorite things on the planet, is what we have found is that you have nitrogen and phosphorus that can be exchanged between the plants. If you have a legume plant that's fixing nitrogen, that's working with the bacteria to fix nitrogen, that's growing near a grass plant. And so in this system, you've got the legume plant that's working with the rhizobium bacteria, and you have both the legume plant and the grass plant that are going to be working with the mycorrhizal fungi. So in this system, I'm going to add another organism. We're going to add another bacteria that actually solubilizes phosphorus. And that bacteria lives on the hyphae of the mycorrhizal fungi. It actually has adapted to the fact that it will attach itself to the hyphal wall, and that allows for that bacterium to move to new environments, because the fungi, again, the fine threads of the fungal hyphae can move into different zones in the soil environment. So we've got 5 organisms, 2 plants, 2 bacteria, and 1 fungus, and they're all going to work together in these complex consortia. So you've got the legume that's going to fix carbon via photosynthesis. It's going to give some of that carbon to the rhizobium bacteria, so the rhizobium bacteria can fix nitrogen. Some of that nitrogen is then going to go into the legume plant, but it also has some excess nitrogen as well. So next to it, you've got the grass plant that's growing, and that grass plant needs nitrogen and phosphorus. So that grass plant tells the mycorrhizal fungi, go out there into the soil and get me nitrogen and phosphorus. The mycorrhizal fungi happens to grow into the roots of the legume plant, and there happens to be excess nitrogen there. So the mycorrhizal fungus says, all right, I can cover that because I can get the nitrogen from the legume plant and I can then deliver that to the grass plant. And it just so happens that I have these phosphate solubilizing bacteria that live on my hyphae, so that as I'm growing in the soil between the 2 plant roots, I can actually pick up phosphorus from the phosphate solubilizing bacteria and give that to you as well. So the grass plant says, okay, cool, I got that covered, that's great. And so then the mycorrhizal fungus goes over to the legume plant and says to the legume plant, give me some excess nitrogen. The legume plant says, all right, I can do that. I got to go talk to my rhizobium bacteria. So they have a little conversation. The rhizobium bacteria says, you know what, I could do that. However, the issue that I have with that is that I need more phosphorus in order to be able to fix nitrogen, because it takes a lot of energy to fix nitrogen. And part of the way that a cell gets energy is through this molecule called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And when you have this ATP molecule, it takes a lot of them in order to fix 1 molecule of nitrogen. So what I need to do is I need you to have phosphorus to come in, because what happens with ATP is adenosine triphosphate in order to be able to get energy, we break the bonds between adenosine and phosphate. And so we lose one of the phosphate groups. And in order for us to continue the cycle, I need to have a new phosphate group come in and make ATP out of ADP, adenosine diphosphate. So now I have to have new ATP. So you have to have this phosphate to continue to come in. And so it tells the legume plant that this is what you need to have happen. And so the legume plant tells the mycorrhizal fungus, I could give you nitrogen, but in order for me to give you nitrogen, you have to give me more phosphate. So the mycorrhizal fungus says, all right, I'll get you more phosphate because I have the phosphate solubilizing bacteria that are on my hyphae so that I can be able to get the phosphate from there. However, I have to pay the phosphate solubilizing bacteria some carbon. And the legume plant says, well, I'm giving carbon to the mycorrhiza to you, and I'm giving carbon to the rhizobium bacteria. So I don't have a lot of carbon excess. How about you go back over to your grass buddy and ask your grass buddy for extra carbon? So it goes over to the grass buddy and it says, if you want nitrogen and phosphorus, you need to give me excess carbon. So the grass says, all right, I can do that. So it fixes more carbon via photosynthesis. It gives that carbon to the mycorrhizal fungus. The mycorrhizal fungus then utilizes that carbon to be able to grow further into the soil. It's able to then give some of that carbon to the phosphate solubilizing bacteria. The phosphate solubilizing bacteria give the phosphate to the mycorrhizal fungus in exchange for the carbon. The carbon then goes into the mycorrhizal fungus, so the fungus can take that carbon and grow better into the roots of the legume plant. It gives some of that phosphate to the legume plant, so the legume plant can give some of that phosphate to the rhizobium bacteria. So rhizobium bacteria can fix more nitrogen, so that nitrogen can then go into the legume plant, and part of that nitrogen can go into the mycorrhizal fungus. So the mycorrhizal fungus can take some of that nitrogen over to the grass plant and be able to give the grass plant some of the nitrogen, as well as some of the phosphorus that it got from the phosphate solubilizing bacteria that picked up along the way. And all of this, we know from research, happens. We've been able to follow this utilizing radioactive isotopes. And we know that this also happens with other elements as well. And this happens, the reason I did this as quickly as I did was this happens instantaneously in this system. And so this is the energy that we need to use in order to be able to have this happen. So what we want to do with our system is we want to treat the soil like we're supposed to treat ourselves, which means that we need to eat small meals throughout the day. We need to eat a diverse diet. We need to exercise, which is putting those stressors on, especially a nutrient stressor into the system. We're going to do that by helping the system by not outsourcing the jobs to the microbial communities. And in return, the microbial community is going to provide all of these different types of nutrients that you're going to need. And we're also going to be able to protect the soil surface. That's the other thing that we need to do. So as we use our management system, as we reduce the amount of tillage that we have, as we reduce the amount of disturbance that we're having in the system, and as we increase the amount of plant growth that we have and the amount of residue that we have and the shading that's going to be coming from a living plant, that's going to protect the soil surface from the injuries that Jimmy had talked about with the erosion that we're getting from wind and water, as well as protecting from radioactive types of issues that we would have in the system. So I'm going to end it there, and hopefully you're now able to think about this interactive community that we have and what may be happening in the soil environment in order for us to work within these consortia as microbes to be able to address these issues. So thank you. And if there are any questions, I'll try and answer them.
Kris, that was fantastic. And probably the part that the saddest part to me is not being able to see you do that in person. There was a couple people in the chat box. They said, whoa, did the audio did it get sped up really fast? And I said, no, this is the brilliance of Kris's presentation, because she really takes us through this entire transaction of what's going on in the soil. And somebody commented in the comments that we need to make it into a song and teach school children, how microbes interact with the soil and how the nutrients get uptake for the plant to use. So that is just really awesome. And just to reiterate, we're talking about treating the soil the way that we should all be treating ourselves. And that's a really good way to put it. You really hone in on that over the years is just how important treating the microbes are to the soil.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, we really, again, it's hard for us sometimes to imagine being microbes. And I just saw a comment about the rotor for brain blew up. So I'm glad that somebody was imagining themselves as microbes. It's hard for us to think about that. And we get ourselves bogged down with the tools, the principles and the practices and the tools we could put into place. And it blows your mind so much that it's like, what do I do and where do I start? And that's why thinking about how you could treat the soil like yourself, it's like, okay, what would I need today? And how could I be able to do that? And I think that hopefully it makes it easier for people to understand that.
Yeah, and folks, just keep the questions going in the chat box. We are recording them, and we are planning to have an extended Q&A session at the end of everybody's presentation, and we're going to make sure we're going to stay on as long as it takes after Soil Health U has ended, as time for you to ask questions directly to our speakers. So keep it going for sure. And over the years, as I've been able to lean in on different soil health presentations, yours in particular, Kris, I hear producers walking away with thinking about harvesting sunlight. And we've had a couple questions in the chat box about, okay, I want to harvest sunlight. I want to be able to keep a green living plant in there. I want to be maximizing my cover crop usage with diverse species of cover crops. But how do you intricately fit in the cash crop situation on top of all of this? Can you just, when you talk to a producer who's just getting started, what are some of the first round of recommendations that you typically look at?
So one of the first things that, I'll sit down and have a conversation with the producer as to where they're at and what they're doing. And one of the first things is as you look at your rotation, where are those opportunities to put in another crop? And the crop, again, is your sunlight harvester crop. It's not a crop that you're trying to grow all the way to flowering and production, but it's really being able to grow that crop for harvesting sunlight. So where are your options and opportunities? And for many producers, one of the first places for them to get started is changing up their rotation a little bit to incorporate things like small grains. So they can incorporate cover crops so that you could add something else at the end of the growing season. But there are also a lot of options and opportunities to do some different things where you can be doing some relay cropping, which would be planting a crop before you harvest the other crop, so that crop is going to be growing. It's not a true double cropping because you may not be able to get 2 full crops growing out of there and have that time to grow 1 full crop, harvest, and then grow another crop. But you could actually put in a crop before you'd go through and doing that harvesting. There are other options and opportunities where you can do polycropping, where you can have 2 different crops growing at the same time and modifying harvesting equipment in order to be able to do that. So you're able to put those things in place. Those leaps in like relay cropping and double cropping and polycropping are a little bit of a harder first leap for a producer to take. So usually I start with talking about small grains and putting in cover crops. And then obviously, we've got a lot of options and opportunities to put in additional cover crops or companion crops while our cash crop is growing. When we talk about it initially, this goes back to what I was saying about water. And this is not about water, it's about nutrients. And so when we improve, part of that efficiency of the gain is that when a plant is trying to get nutrients from the soil, the plant has to give off water to create mass flow. And so what ends up happening is that the plant will give off more water. It has to create a mass flow environment around the roots when those nutrients are further away from the roots, or they're not being delivered by the mycorrhizal fungi right inside the roots. And so it's more water that gets given off, and the more water that gets given off, the more that the plant may look like it's suffering from drought, but it's actually suffering from nutrient stress. So again, if we can increase the activity, and this is why we've changed tools for good fertilizer placement near the plant roots, because we knew that the mass flow was causing us to lose a lot of water. Now we're able to actually even do that even better with working with the microbial community. So again, when you look at that idea of, I don't want to plant companion crops, I don't want to have a cover crop that's going to be a companion crop that may grow more after my cash crop is harvested, because that's going to steal water from my cash crop. It's what nutrients is that actually going to give your cash crop, so that you're better able to use that. So there are a lot of, again, options and opportunities that we can put into place.
So you really keyed up our next speaker. We're going to get to him in just a few moments. But first, just talking about relay cropping and intercropping, I think that the time is right for us to have an entire meeting over these amazing opportunities that producers have right now. And I know that we have a number of producers on this call right now that participate in relay cropping and intercropping. So I would highly suggest those of you to look into what folks are doing out there. It's happening in Kansas, it's happening in Iowa, it's happening in a lot of different places. So that's relay cropping and intercropping. So thank you so much, Kris. We appreciate your time today. And Kris is going to stick on for the extended Q&A and the breakout sessions that we're having down the road. But right now is a really exciting time for me, because we are going to talk about some awards that we're going to be giving here. So now for more excitement. At the root of it, soil health begins with individuals who steward the land and natural resources entrusted to their care. This year, High Plains Journal will honor 2 individuals who have distinguished themselves as outstanding stewards of the soil. I'm pleased to announce Amy Seeger is our 2021 Soil Health U Regenerative Woman of the Year. Through the Oklahoma Conservation Commission and NRCS, Amy serves as the State Soil Health Coordinator for Oklahoma. In this role, she works directly with conservation districts, NRC staff, and producers from all over the state. Amy and her soil health team are currently collaborating on several projects with General Mills, the Chickasaw Nation, NRCS, the Nature Conservancy, and many others. In her 3 short years at the OCC, she and her team have doubled their outreach numbers, assisted conservation districts with successful soil health field days, and she continues to provide a monthly newsletter that has a reach of over 8,000 recipients to date. Amy is a well-known champion for soil health with the farmers she works with every single day. Amy was nominated by Nicole Ragland and Jimmy Emmons, and Nicole has to say that Amy is a driving force in the state of Oklahoma promoting soil health. She comes from a farming family herself, and she realizes the importance at a very early age of soil health, and she has devoted her life to it ever since. So Amy, congratulations. You are well deserving of this recognition. I'm very proud of you and the work that you're doing down in Oklahoma. So thank you for being with us today.
I appreciate it. I'm very honored, and obviously cannot get the work accomplished without Jimmy leading the way, Greg Scott with former NRCS, Steve Osbald. They've all been very great mentors to me. And of course, loving farming for my parents. So thank you for High Plains Journal and Soil Health U for recognizing women in leadership roles and addressing it. So thank you.
It's our pleasure, Amy, and thanks for the work that you do down in Oklahoma, and understand that your reach goes far and wide. We really appreciate it. So next off, I'm pleased to announce that we've also selected a Soil Health U Young Regenerative Producer of the Year. And that producer is Macaulay Mac Kincaid of Kincaid Farms in Jasper, Missouri. At just 26 years old, Mac has already made a big splash in the regenerative agriculture space by his tenacity and willingness to learn new farming techniques. What began a little over 4 years ago to improve water holding capacity on his 600-acre farm has grown to include regenerative practices that not only increase soil health, but has helped Mac gain confidence to help educate his peers along the way. Mac uses a systems approach to his farming operation in order to care for Mother Earth and her inhabitants according to his Christian values. In nominating Kincaid, many of his peers echoed sentiments that man's passion for doing what's right by the land and helping others along their path is an inspiration to all. I have the privilege of knowing Mac and Amy both personally, and I can truly attest to just their willingness to steward the land. So Mac, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you, Jessica. And thank you, High Plains Journal and Soil Health U for awarding me this. You know, one thing I want to say is it's really important to have good mentors. And I hope everyone finds those mentors, whether you're just young like me or you're starting out or whatever that might be. Find those people that are going to be there to help you.
Absolutely. And that's one thing that High Plains Journal has recognized. And that's why we have such an emphasis on our U events within the High Plains Journal, not only Soil Health U, but we have other events. But the farmer to farmer contact, the farmer to farmer education, producers are really leading the way on all of these topics. And that's why I have so much hope right now in the soil health space. So thank you so much to our award winners. And now I'm going to hand it over to Jenny Latzke to help us out with a few more of our sponsors.
Once again, we want to add our congratulations to Mac and Amy on behalf of the staff and management of High Plains Journal. We are so very proud to be able to recognize your hard work. And folks, if you've got a deserving producer in your life that you'd like to recognize, just go ahead and let us know. We'll be calling for nominees for the 2022 Soil Health U Awards later this year. And as always, we couldn't do these sort of events without our wonderful sponsors. And our premier partner for Soil Health U is PrairieFood. PrairieFood is definitely a company that you're going to want to pay attention to in the coming years. Their intention is to revolutionize the way our world farms. PrairieFood's patented high-tech process takes any bio-waste and turns it into a microcarbon-rich soil amendment. It's the superfood that feeds your soil. In PrairieFood's first growing year, this year alone, they're recording increased yields, bursts of microbial activity, and excellent SOM increases, all of which increases property values and significantly benefits the environment. Let's take a look.
I'm lucky enough to be the first person in line to see what's happening in the field trials for PrairieFood because I get to see that first raw data set. PrairieFood is pure carbon that's in a form that is digestible by soil microbes. It's in lots of different sizes. It's immediately digestible within the first minute it hits the ground. I'm seeing everything from an increase in soil organic matter to a burst of microbial activity in the soil. And those two factors alone increase the plant's vitality.
A farmer wants to use PrairieFood hands down for the rest of their life because one, they're going to be adding so much carbon to the soil instead of taking carbon out every year. Most farmers, they look 5-10 years down the road, but they also have to look at that first year. Okay, where am I at this year? Well, PrairieFood solves both those problems. It takes the needs that you have this year, but it also builds up your soil for 10 years down the road as well.
So important with the way the world's changing that the future really does belong to the bold. Don't get left behind.
We applied PrairieFood to the roots via drip irrigation and waited. And the results were insane.
And stakeholders are important because myself, I wear a lot of hats, my son wears a lot of hats, but we rely on trusted stakeholders in our operation to be able to provide the kind of integrity, but also the trust that it's going to take to invest in our operation. Our success breeds success for them.
With PrairieFood, I expect the harvest overall to be better, the yield to be better, the standability of the plant to be better. So I'm really excited about getting there, and we're about a month away from harvest right now. So we shall see. The combine's the ultimate test.
When we got there with the combine, and you couldn't really see it until we started combining, and then you see it in the yield monitor, the ears. We just overall, it worked, period. What we did worked. Yeah, I'm all in for next year.
Thank you so very much, PrairieFood. And you can find more information on PrairieFood by visiting soilhealthu.net/sponsors. Jess, I'll turn it back to you for our last speaker of the day.
Awesome. Thank you, Jenny. Moving on, with me today, I have Rick Clark. Rick Clark is 5th-generation farmer from Williamsport, Indiana. The main goal on his farm is to build soil health and achieve balance with Mother Nature. Rick is qualified and constantly improves his systematic approach with regenerative farming. His farm strives to be a low-cost input producer while maintaining an increase in yield year after year. Rick cares deeply about human health as well, and that is one of the main drivers behind his organic no-till system of farming. Rick is building a system that will be viable for sustainable generations to come. So welcome to the stage, Rick Clark.
Thank you so much. It is quite an honor to be here today, and you have put me behind two powerful people. So I hope I can live up to what needs to happen here today. But I think my presentation is going to do a very nice job of putting together of what Dr. Nichols presented and what Jimmy presented also. So I think this is going to be good. Let's go. Okay, everything at the Clark Farms is, the future looks good. It's bright, and I put this slide up for a couple of things. The brightest spot in 2020 for me was those two beautiful grandchildren there in the picture. That is just tremendous. It changes your life. It changes your outlook on the way you look at life. And it also is important that we have the support of everyone that's involved. You need to have support of family members. You need to have support of the team members that are part of the farm. It takes everyone to make this work. I want to give just a little bit of history of what I've done in my life here. I'm a Purdue grad from Ag Econ, the School of Ag Econ. So please don't hold that against me, but it's okay. I'm a 5th-generation farmer. I've been practicing now for about 37 years. Beautiful wife, Carol, for 32 years. Two beautiful daughters, Jessica and Rachel. They have the wonderful grandchildren. On the farm is my father, Richard, my nephew, Aaron. We've been no-tilling soybeans now for about 17 years, no-tilling corn for 12, cover crops for 12, and farming green for 10. And I'm going to give my definition of farming green in just a little bit. All right, 6 crop system plus 1. Now, most of my neighbors farm 2 crops, corn and soybeans. You've heard Jimmy talk about this already. You've heard Kris talk about this already. Cash crop rotation is critical to this system to work. Not in any particular order, but corn, soybeans, wheat, alfalfa, peas, and livestock. That's the 6 system. The plus 1 is regen. Now, regen is an opportunity for you to lay acres out of cash crop production. So these acres are now going to be solely toward building soil health. It gives opportunities to start the season off with the cool season package. Then you can move into your warm season package, and then you can build the cocktail that you want for the coming cash crop. So this is a way to start taking away those excuses. I live too far north. It's too cold. It's too hot. It's too wet. Whatever all those excuses we've all heard, we now can start to take those away. And you also have heard mentioned several times, cereal grains, small grains, whatever you want to call. Wheat is in the lineup. Wheat then is not the opportunity to double crop soybeans. Falling wheat is the opportunity to put in a massive warm season cocktail that typically most of us cannot do because of weather-related events. 1,200 acres of certified organic, and the balance of our acres are in transition to organic. Now, this is not going to be an organic presentation, but you're going to see that a lot of the things that we're doing, you can stop short and you can do a lot of these practices and start saving money on your inputs. We use no starter fertilizer. We use no fungicides. We use no seed treatments, no insecticides. We've not applied any phosphorus, potassium, or ag lime in 7 years. So this now starts to build on what Kris was talking about. You take away these attributes that are scorching and burning our soil profile, the microbes in the biome, and you now let them start to breathe and do the functions that they were supposed to be doing. So that's what we're doing on this farm. But remember, folks, it's taken years to get to this point. You just cannot flip the switch tomorrow. We've not applied any nitrogen in the corn for 2 years, and that includes manure. Now, I have a couple thoughts on manure. Manure, I'm not sure the system, when I say the system, the microbial biome, the soil health building, the regenerative practices, I don't think they can handle a flush of 20,000 gallons of liquid cow manure. I think it's a shock to the system. I think it possibly could even kill some microbes. It's definitely going to slow their functionality down. So maybe I'm being too direct and too definite by taking it all away, but I am convinced that if we take everything away, we can do everything we need to do through diversification, crop rotation, and building soil health. Everything we're doing is trying to be done naturally. Okay, definition of farming green. Planting the cash crop of corn and soybeans into a living, growing green cover crop. Termination may not occur for up to 30 days. That'll be the soybean part of the program. And typically it's going to happen within 3 to 5. Now, in that video that's being ran there, we're planting corn into 5-foot tall cereal rye. Everything you read, everything you say here, you can't plant corn into cereal rye. Yes, you can, if you understand what's happening here. At this point in this growth cycle of the rye, it's at least 70-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio. It is sequestering every available nutrient there is in the area. And what's happening is it's just taking it away from what the corn's availability could be. So if you are in a system that still wants to use some synthetic nitrogen, this is okay. I do not do this much anymore because we are not applying nitrogen in any form, even if it's an OMRI approved source. So our system has changed a little bit, but this style of farming right here is what got us to where we are today. Benefits of farming green. There's the same cornfield that cereal rye was terminated with a roller crimper and rolled down. So you can see what now is happening. When we plant these cocktails, they are sometimes upwards of $40 an acre. The last thing I want to do is go out the first warm day of spring and burn all of these to the ground with chemicals. You have not let this cover crop maximize what it was intended to do. And to piggyback on what Kris was talking about so much, this is the species that are collecting the sun for us. So don't take them out of the picture so early in the growing season. If it's a cereal grain like a cereal rye or a barley or a triticale, they're gonna sequester nutrients, tremendous sequesters of nutrients, and tremendous soil erosion mitigation. Nitrogen fixing. If it's a legume package, we don't want to go out on April 25th and burn it to the ground. I've got some slides coming that are going to show you the power of legumes. We no longer plant corn before Mother's Day for many reasons now, and you're going to see the major reason coming up. Growing carbon. This is the big buzz. We've all got to get into these carbon markets. We've got to grow carbon. We haven't signed up for any markets. I think they're young. I think they need a lot of work yet. We got to make sure both parties on each side of the equation are being treated fairly. That's a whole nother subject for another day, but we're growing carbon. Erosion control. You can see that mat is giving us wind erosion and water erosion. Increased pounds of biomass. This is what it's all about right here. We need, in the system that we're heading down with this regenerative organic, and I mentioned to you folks that we are in total transition to organic, but it's way beyond organic. We are doing this with zero tillage, no tillage whatsoever. So everything that is being done for the benefit of the cash crop has to come through cover crops. That's nutrients and that's weed suppression. So it's all about biomass. We need to have upwards of 8, 9, 10,000 pounds to be able to hold the system to what we need it to do. Feeding the microbes. Now, I don't know what all these microbes are called. I don't need to know that. That's what Dr. Nichols is for. She will tell us what all this stuff is. I just know they're down. I know that if you go out with a teaspoon and scoop up, there's more living organisms in that teaspoon of soil than there are people on the earth. I don't know what they want to eat, but we're going to give them a diversity. And then we can satisfy the microbes with whatever diversity is there. Armor the soil. This is critical. If we do not armor the soil and protect it from the elements, the scorching sun, yes, the sun is our friend for photosynthesis, but it also can absolutely wreak havoc on these microbes that live closer to the surface when that temperature can get upwards of 120 degrees. We've got to constantly keep this soil armored. Limit evaporation. Jimmy talked about the proud fact that he's got water infiltration rates that are out of sight. I would be absolutely ecstatic. Right now, we've done similar tests. We're at about 5 inches an hour on infiltration rates, but that's the beginning of the process. Let's don't let it all evaporate away into the atmosphere if you don't have the soil covered and armored. So we've got to think about this as a full, total benefit, systematic approach. Suppress weeds. Now, I've told you that we are organic, and that's fine. If you don't want to come over to the island that I'm on, I mean, I don't know of a lot of people that are doing organic with no tillage and doing this all with cover crops. If you're out there, please come and join me. I'd love the company. But you're going to see that we don't have to go all the way to where I am, and we still can be building soil health and working within these systematic approaches. What drives our system? It's all about building soil health. I will sacrifice yield to build soil health. I do it every single day. Diversification. Diversification of cover crops. It's been mentioned several times in this conference so far today. Not only do we need diversification of numbers of species within that cocktail, but we need to figure out how to get diversification from annuals to perennials, because there are so many symbiotic relationships going on that we need to maximize that diversification. Cash crop rotation. I told you we have 6 cash crop rotations now. Our neighbors think there's only 2. And I understand you can only have a cash crop for if there's a market. If there's not a market for triticale, then don't grow triticale. But there are markets out there. There are logistics out there that are improving. There are freight rates. You can do shipments on trains. There's a lot of ways to move product. Your market does not have to be just 10 miles from home anymore. Data collection. This is imperative. You must collect data, and it's not only data collection, it's what do you do with that data? I mean, yeah, these are beautiful yield maps, but what do they mean? So not only collecting, but we've got to know how to use this data to help us. We've been collecting data on our farm for over 20 years. That makes my decisions so much easier. And I'm going to get into that in a little bit in the future here. Armor the soil, I've already talked about that, but that is part of what drives our system. Building human health. We do not think about this enough. When you're a kid and you can't, and it's spring out and your dad's planting, you can't wait to get home to help dad plant corn. So you hurry home from school and he's putting on these white boxes on the planter. And I mean, they smell terrible. I don't know what this stuff is. It's got a skull and crossbones on it, but I want to help dad. So we're putting this stuff on, and while we're putting it on, Dad, what in the world is this? Well, son, that's insecticide. We've got to have this to raise corn. Okay. Why? What's with the skull and crossbones? Well, son, that's death. So, and then you're like, well, why are we doing this? There's got to be other ways. So I don't want to jeopardize my family members. I don't want to jeopardize our team members. So we are also striving toward building soil health. And there's also another factor of building this soil health building systematic approach is going to increase nutrient density. So there's many ways to look at improving soil health. Being a good steward, that is simple, self-explanatory. It's way more than soil health and conservationism. It's things like, if you have a tile hole, fix it. If you have a wash in your field, fix the wash, build a waterway. Be a good steward to the land. And the last thing on the component that drives our system is ROI. Now, I did go to Purdue, and I understand that you have to have yield to calculate ROI. I know that, but yield is not on this page. Yield does not drive our system. And that is a very big step to overcome, to be going down this regenerative stewardship trail that we're going down. So unfortunately, too many times the success of a farmer is based on yield, and that's incorrect in my opinion. Nutrient sequestration of cereal rye. This is powerful. This is a very, very powerful slide. This is going to start to represent what I was referring to on the carbon to nitrogen ratio with raising corn into this environment. Now this is what, here, let me set this up. So this field would have been in corn stalks the previous year. So that fall we came in, planted, we drilled 100 pounds of Elbon cereal rye. It grows, it goes into dormancy, comes out of dormancy, takes off in the spring. And then what we do is we go out and we measure a 2 foot by 2 foot square. We clip everything in that square at ground. Now this is ground level up only, folks. That's all this is. Put it in a bag, send it to the lab, and we get these results back. Now I'm going to venture to say that most cereal rye is terminated at this stage because everyone doesn't want it to get out of control. Okay. We've done some good here, but we've left a lot on the table. Now take a look at, again, I told you this was going to be a soybean field. So let's start to look at, I made the conversion here, the 0060 or potash. It's already got 133 pounds of potash in that plant, that above ground plant. It's unreal. Now look at the nitrogen. 82 pounds were sequestered by this cereal rye plant. So now you begin to see why it's not difficult to raise corn into this system. You just have to understand what's happening. 4 days. If you would have given this 4 days, it grew 6 more inches. Look at the nitrogen that was sequestered now, and now look at the potash and look at the biomass. We're starting to get where we want to go here. But if you burn this stuff down, you're not getting these benefits. That's why we've done this farming green. We've let these cover crops go well into maturity. 28-inch rye. Look at these numbers. 134 pounds of nitrogen, 281 pounds of potash was sequestered by that cereal rye plant. And our biomass is now up to numbers that we are close to having success. Now, what I like to look at with the cover crop and the canopy of the cash crop is a 70-30 ratio. I need the cover crop to give 70% weed suppression, and the canopy of the cash crop is going to do the other 30. So we are on 20-inch row spacing corn and 20-inch row spacing soybeans so that we can get to those canopies quickly and help with this weed suppression. Now, luckily, I had my brain hooked on when I did this. And by the way, we do this every single year now so that I can start to see the trends of what the cereal rye is doing in our system. But luckily, I came back 2 months after termination and we tested the sample again. And this is what was left. So you can see there's still a lot of nitrogen left in that cereal rye plant. But it's starting to be released. Now, this is about August the 1st. But look at the potash number. It's fallen all the way to 65. So a lot of that potash that was sequestered is now, in my opinion, and Dr. Nichols could maybe explain this better, but I think it's going to be available for that cash crop plant pretty much immediately. Now, I have a thought about cereal rye. Cereal rye is a tremendous suppressor of weeds. Okay, I think there's two things happening here. Cereal rye is going to do it from just sheer fact of biomass and smothering effect. I think that's one of the attributes. I think here's the other thing that's going on. And once you start to think like this and drill deeper into what's happening, it all starts to make sense. I think the cereal rye is sequestering the nutrients to the amount that is actually starving the early germinating weeds that are typically in a system. And now when you bring on the late arrival of it's now releasing later in the season, then what do we typically fight? We fight grass, because grass is a later season germinating species, and it is now feeding all that fuel to the grass. So I think that's what's happening. And once we understand some of these triggers that are going on, we now change the way we put cash crops out to alter when these weeds think it's time to do their thing. The power of Balanza fixation clover. This is number 2 system in the way we plant corn. I told you we don't use any synthetic nitrogen and we use no manure, so we have to grow everything. May 20th. Now, I mentioned that we do not plant corn until after Mother's Day, and that's typically around May the 12th, plus or minus. Okay. This will be an example right here. If you wanted to just wait until May the 20th and let's take some nitrogen credits right here and then let's start to back off of the synthetic N that's being used. On May the 20th, we're at 75 pounds of N and 3,800 pounds of biomass. That's still not enough for what I need for our system. June the 4th, 114 pounds of nitrogen has been fixed by this powerful legume. And look at the K2O and just look at everything down that list. We're up to 6,800 pounds of biomass. 4 days again, folks. If we could wait 4 days. 262 pounds of nitrogen, 444 pounds of K2O. Everything we need to grow the crop is right below our feet. We just have to get it unlocked. We have to feed those microbes that Dr. Nichols was talking about. This is exactly what we're doing now. Look at the biomass, 12,700 pounds. Now, I don't know what exactly are these numbers to take, but I do know we do testing on our farm every year. We could debate this, but I'm going to take half of that nitrogen credit right now. That 262 pounds I'm taking now. Now, my relationship of needed nitrogen to a bushel of yield is 0.8. That's my factor. Now we have to be realistic. about what our yield goals are. Sure, I want to raise 250 bushel corn, but is that realistic? No. What is realistic in the system that you are in? For me right now, going organic with no tillage and doing all this with Mother Nature and in cover crops, my realistic yield goal for corn is 140. So take 140 times that 0.8, we now have ample amounts of nitrogen to raise this crop. The point here is stop over applying nitrogen. Okay? We can do this. If you don't want to come with me all the way, take 70 units of credit and stop applying synthetic N by 70 units. If nothing else, it's going to save you money. Again, I did the same thing, came back on July 24th and retested what was there. We did the same process, 2 foot, 2 foot square, clipped at the ground and sent off to the lab. Now, this was a carbon to nitrogen ratio of 20:1. So it's not surprising that when you look at June 8th biomass and look at July 24th biomass, that's why it's falling so quickly. You understand now why this corn's got to get up and go and get to canopy. On June 8th, the sample was taken. Organic carbon was 5,200 pounds per acre. And I also call this the power of patience. So it took patience to get to this point, and that's what this is all about. All right, everything I've been talking about is leading up to balance, a symbiotic relationship with Mother Nature, predator to prey, fungi to bacteria. Let's start with predator to prey. Everyone asks me, how can you plant non-GMO corn without any insecticide? It's very simple. We've taken away all of the attributes that are killing the beneficial species and the beneficial microbes. And once you bring that system back into balance, you now have whatever preys on a corn rootworm is now in the profile within enough balance to keep that at bay. And once you start to take these things away, this system just starts to build and it becomes almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. It just keeps generating and building and releasing nutrients that your cash crops need. Change is good. We have to think about this. It's hard. I'm not here to criticize the way anybody farms. That's not what I do. I'm here to only show you another method to maybe consider a different way. As soil health increases, so does human health. And this is what I've been talking about. This is absolute insanity in my opinion. 30% less nutrient density than 25 years ago in our food. It takes 8 oranges today to equal 1 orange from 50 years ago. That is not acceptable. We have to figure out how to work in these regenerative systems to bring this nutrient density back to our food. This is one of the ways I enjoy, and this is the only way we do soybeans now. We are no-till planting soybeans at boot stage into 5-foot tall cereal rye. This is the preferred way to do soybeans. And the roller crimper is going to come in 30 to 40 days after this. So I have to give Dr. Erin Silva at the University of Wisconsin credit. She taught us and myself and 40 other people in a room how to do this. We go out at boot stage and we plant the soybean. This is what the field is going to look like on July the 16th. Absolutely amazing. No inputs of any kind. And what we've done is we have eliminated any burn down or anything. The roller crimper has done everything for us. That is what that same field looked like on August the 10th. The weed suppression has been very good. Now, this goes back to what I talked about a little bit earlier. If you look in this picture, what do we see? We see foxtail coming. I think this plays into what I was talking about earlier, that a lot of the cereal rye is sequestering those nutrients up front for those earlier season germinating weeds, those broadleaves, and now it's releasing for the grasses. Okay, this is one of the approaches we like. I had a slide earlier on fixation clover. That's one of our methods to plant corn. This is probably the preferred method right now. We are no-till planting corn into standing alfalfa. This is 2-year-old alfalfa that we are no-till planting in. This is part of the 3-pass system that I like to describe. This is difficult, folks. This is risky. We are planting a warm season grass of corn into a perennial alfalfa. This is very dangerous. But what I like about this is in the organic world, what we've accomplished here now is by having 2 years of alfalfa and it's been clipped 4 or 5 times a year, we have now reduced the weed bank down to hardly anything. So we're now going into planting corn into this system in a fairly clean, weed-free environment. And now we've also, we've got the fuel that we need to raise this corn. Now we are roll crimping the alfalfa. There's the 60-foot I&J chevron roller. We're roll crimping the alfalfa, and we are doing this at around V1. Now we know this does not terminate the alfalfa. We know that the alfalfa is extremely difficult to kill. But what this is doing is giving the corn an even playing field now. Now we hope the corn can get through this alfalfa and take off and start reaching for the sky. And one of the first questions I get asked is, how are you going to terminate this alfalfa? Well, back to my 70-30 rule, the canopy of the cash crop, believe it or not, is going to smother and kill and suffocate this alfalfa, and it is going to pretty much terminate it. Now, we've been doing this for 3 years now, and we've had very good success at terminating the alfalfa with just the canopy of the corn crop. Is this perfected? By no means this is perfected, but this is a way to start thinking about doing this with no disruption to the soil. Okay. Now this is the same. Now when I set these videos up, folks, I try to set it up so it's the same field in through the progression of time. This is the same cornfield. Now we also had another phenomenon take place here. We had 2 waves of black cutworm. It was unbelievable. It wiped out the cornfield twice. But this is what we had of the finished product. So now you look at this and you now have to be realistic about things. Are we going to have a full corn crop potential here with yield? No way. No way. We had 2 waves of cutworm. By the time it was finally done, it was June the 20th. And here we are with a crop that's finally started to grow, and away we go. So now you just have to look at realistic. This is going to be 100 bushel corn. That's okay. We're looking at averages. We didn't have every field in this situation. So we're looking at averages across the system. Livestock. Jimmy talked about this. Kris talked about this. This is critical. That's the most efficient way to build soil health is with livestock. Now, this is not particularly high impact paddock grazing, but this is just showing you that there are cattle on our farm. And you know what? You don't even have to own all your own cattle. There are locations around where you can ship cattle in. You can pay them, or they're gonna pay you for rate of gain, and away we go. So livestock are very important. You need the infrastructure of fence. There's been so many updates to fence building. It's very cheap to build fence anymore. In remote locations where you don't want to dig a well or have electricity, we put up solar panels to run the energizers to energize the fence. And then we have water on wheels, and we just haul water every day to the tanks and hook them up to floats. So it can be done. Good data leads to good decisions that puts you in a position of strength. I've already alluded to this, but when you collect the data, not only collect it, but now use the data to your benefit, you then put yourself in a position of strength. This is probably the most powerful slide in the presentation. It is showing stability. If you look at that corn chart on the left and go over to the far left, that is way back in the beginnings of our journey down this soil health building journey that we're on. As we brought more cover crops, more diversity, and more no-till and took all the tillage away, those two lines came together. What we're showing here is standard deviation is yield. So before the implementation of cover crops and no-till, we had a yield variance within any given field of almost 30 bushels. So you go from one end of the field to the other, and you could have up to a 30 bushel swing. That's a lot. Now, with the implementation and the stability in the system, we are now less than 5 bushel. And look at our consistency of what our yield is, and it's on an upswing. So now if you get a weather-related market rally, you now have the conviction and the comfort to sell a pretty large yield expectation based on the stability that this is showing. And the only way to get this kind of stability is to collect data and use it to your advantage. Puts you in a position of strength. Soybeans, same thing. Almost 9 bushel variance, cover crops, less than 3 now. Okay, this is what I call our system, ROSE, regenerative, organic, stewardship, education. Regenerative organic is a systematic approach to building soil health and being a good steward to the land with no tillage and no inputs, period. Now, I know that is a very strong statement, but that is the world that I want to live in. Now, you don't need to come all the way with me, but let's at least start implementing some of these practices. I need to probably tell the folks, I didn't do this very well in the beginning. I am located in West Central Indiana, the Indiana-Illinois line, 15 miles north of Interstate 74. We farm on both sides of the line. So I am north of the folks, most of the folks that are probably watching this. But just remember, if we take these excuses away, we can get these things implemented. Okay, start easy. Don't get in over your head. This is critical. It is critical that the very first time out, you have success, because what I'm afraid of is if you don't have success on that first time, you're going to maybe walk away and not come back. Do not plant wheat following beans in the rolled rye. What I mean by this is when you plant late into the growing or into that growing season of the cereal rye, it's at anthesis, it's dropping pollen. It is now fertilizing some of those seeds. You're going to have volunteer rye growing next spring. If you are intending on harvesting wheat to go to the elevator, you're going to have volunteer rye in that sample. You'll get rejected. Know your date for winter kill species. This is important. You need to know where you are in the region of the world. What's your weather? Because a lot of these warm season species, if not all of them, are going to winter kill. And if your frost or your date to affect the growth or maybe even kill these species is, say, only 15 days away, then it probably will not be to your benefit to spend that money to plant those species. So just know where you are in that time frame for winter kill. Be aware of hard seed. I don't think this is super critical to worry about. The number one thing here is hairy vetch, and you just need to be aware that it's going to have a certain percentage of seed that nothing's going to kill. Once you are aware of that, it's okay to use. We use it on the farm. It's okay. It's okay to shorten relative maturity of the cash crop. You're going to have to do this. If you want to get these cover crops planted in a timely fashion, you've got to shorten up. I've explained to you where we are in the world now. We used to plant 110 to 116 day corn. We now plant 98 to 106, 3.2 to 4.2 soybeans. We're now 1.7 to 2.6. This gives us the opportunity to get the cover crop planted at a timely fashion. It is critical. Do not underestimate the power of what's happening right now. I know this is virtual, it doesn't matter. There's still wonderful presenters giving wonderful information. There's all kinds of opportunities to get into a chat room. There's abilities to ask questions. You can even get contact information. Do not underestimate what's happening here, because this is what it takes to keep this movement going forward. Scout field, stay on top of problems. We need to understand what's happening out there. When you move into this world and none of your neighbors have come with you, your fields are now magnets for every possible species available, whether it's good or bad. So be aware of what's going on. Keep plants attached. What I mean by this is, if you're going down the road and your plan was to terminate that cereal rye at 2 feet tall, Mother Nature decided to rain and you can't get in there until it's 5 feet tall, do not go in with a disc or something like that. Think you're going to knock it down, because you're going to dislodge roots, you're going to break off stems, and anything rolling on your planter is going to pick it up. Do not panic and ask for help. There are so many people out there that are willing to help you. This movement has woken so many organizations up, and one of the ones that is there to really help you is USDA, NRCS. They have their DCs in place. They are getting trained. You can walk into their offices or an SWCD, or you can, again, do what we're doing here with this networking, go to these seminars. If they're not live, don't worry about it. You're still getting valuable information. There are a lot of resources to get help from. Do not plant VNS cereal rye if you roll crimp. And all I mean by this is VNS is variety not stated. It will not roll crimp down if you have multiple varieties, because they're going to mature at different levels, and it's just not going to be a satisfactory crimp. Collecting good data is critical to success. I've already driven this home. Let's move on. Educate your landlords. Most will be supportive. Again, this is another excuse I get, Rick. I can't go into your system because I've only got a 3-year contract. And why would I want to invest this money into a 3-year situation when I could lose it? I'm telling you, if you are going to be surprised if you sit down and talk to your landlords, most of them are going to say, wow, you are going to take that kind of care to my land. Let's go. Let's move forward. Maybe even we'll sign a 10-year contract. You will be surprised. You need to view the cover crop as important as the cash crop. That's what I do. I almost view the cover crop more important than the cash crop, because it all starts with the cover crop. That's the fuel that we're collecting the sunlight with. That's what's giving the canopy for the weed suppression. It's the basis of everything in this system. Viewed as an outlier, that's probably the calmest word that I could use right there. Believe me, you're going to be called a lot of things. I can't mention them here today, but that's okay. Have thick skin and keep moving forward. Continue to soil test. And I'm going to put a little caveat here. I'm not doing much of the traditional soil testing anymore. I am all going to do only the Rick Haney soil test. It is it's way beyond a soil test. It is a soil health test. And we do everything that's within that test. PLFA, Solvita, CO2 burst. We do everything that's in there. Now, I want to explain a little bit how we do the Haney test, and you can do this any way you want. We geospatially mark in the field 3 locations: highest production, lowest production, average production. and we spatially mark them so we can go back to those same locations every single time. And we're doing this twice a year, spring and fall. We always don't know when the activity of the microbes are going to be at the highest or the lowest. So I want to cover any possibility. I probably need to do a third one and do it in the middle of the growing season. Probably be a good idea. But that's the testing that we're going to continue to do from here forward. Do whatever you can to have a cover on every acre. I know I've said this a lot. Jimmy said it, Kris said it, but folks, this is imperative that we get covers on every acre. Do not get hung up on yield. I know this is difficult. I would much rather be a low-cost input producer that has rising yields than a farmer that's chasing yield. And by the way, that is my simple definition of soil health. As inputs go down and yield goes up, how can you not be building soil health? It's that simple. Don't make this complex. You know, Dr. Nichols talked, and so did Jimmy, they both talked about aggregate stability. Maybe that's another way to measure soil health. That's a fairly easy way to measure soil health. Keep this simple. I don't know of any metric that is repeatable and accurate to measure organic matter in the soil profile. Maybe there is one, I'm unaware of it, but keep this stuff simple for now. Be patient, the soil starts to change at year 3. So just hang in there and keep doing what you're doing because you're going to see it happen. Establish a baseline to monitor change. This is so critical. How do you know where you're going if you don't know where you've been? So baseline, and I think you'll see it'll be an excellent exercise to see how much money you're spending on inputs. Delta Force. Now, I don't sell anything, but I'm only trying to help you with these thought processes to help you get through this system a little quicker than I did. Delta Force is a hydraulic down force and up force on your planter. And what it does is it now makes your row unit stable. And with Delta Force on your iPad, there's a function in the iPad that you can go to as applied down force. So what this is the difference of the weight of your row unit versus how much force you're applying in the system. On most of our fields, we have gotten so much tilth and so much aggregate stability, and we are so mellow in our soils. Almost every field we're in, the as applied down force is a negative number. That means the planter unit is being lifted as we're driving through the field. So we need that hydraulic force to hold that unit where it belongs. Test on your own farm to see what works or does not work. It is critical that you do this. We test everything that we can on our farm. You're going to hear a lot of great things come out of all of the presenters' mouths today. It's all great stuff. But believe me, there's a lot of heartache in here too. There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of sleepless nights. So do testing on your own farm. Don't just take for granted from what I'm saying. And by the way, this is a very advanced system that we have. And I can't guarantee that this is going to work on your farm, but I have very good hopes that most of this stuff will. Remember, the people who are being talked about are the ones who are creating the change. Change is good. Take that as a compliment that people are talking about you. Simple, or stop looking at single year ROI and take the average. I told you we've got a 6-crop system and we also have regen. So how in the world, Rick, can you take an acre out of production and not expect any income off that acre and still be able to survive? Start to look at the average. And by the way, that regen is not a zero. You are gaining so much soil health. You've now woken the microbes up. They are now functioning at full throttle efficiency. And now you have laid the groundwork for a hugely successful cash crop the following year. Now you start to look at that as a 4 or 5 or 6 year rotation and divide by that. Now it starts to make sense. Be aware of residual chemicals used. Too many times we go out and in the spring or even in that fall and we say, yep, see, there it is. The cover crops didn't grow, another year that they didn't work. Now hang on a second. What was your chemical program and when did you spray it? And now let's start to look at, did that chemistry, is that antagonizing with that species? Okay. Evernote. This is a daily journal app that I think is very, very useful. It's another data layer to go back and look at. It gives you the ability to take a picture and then upload that picture and add text to it. So now you can walk into your field, take a picture and describe what you are seeing so that later on, when you want to see why one field yielded differently than another field, you can now pull up this Evernote layer and see that, oh, okay, that field, the stand of cover crop was 80%, and over here, for some reason, this field only had 30%. It's just another data layer. Do not jeopardize the livelihood of the farm. This is important, folks. You cannot go out and you've heard a lot of great stuff here today, but it takes time to get to where we are. So please do not go out and just across the board change your entire farming structure. I'm afraid it could have not very good consequences. Buy cover crop seed from reputable sources. You don't want to bring your neighbor's weed bank into your farm. Do not get into a monoculture with cover crops. We can do this just like we do with cash crops. I told you that soybeans and cereal rye go together tremendously. It's a great combo, but you have to do more than that. You have to get that cash crop out of the way and get to a point to where you could add some sorghum Sudan, some cowpeas, some radish, some sun hemp, sunflower. All of these species I just mentioned are all going to winter kill, and they've given diversity to the profile, and they've now feeding different groups of microbes with different exudates. All of these things are happening because you put that diversity out there. So please, please try to get as much diversity into these cocktails as possible. More thoughts. The success of next year's cash crop starts with the success of this year's cover crop. I've driven this home a bunch, but this is how important this is. That field of soybeans I showed you earlier in the presentation, that field stayed clean like that the whole growing season. But the reason why was there's many reasons, but one of the major reasons why was the cover crop was planted by September the 20th, the previous fall. That gave us that foothold that we needed to come out next spring and have 7,000 pounds of biomass and suppress those weeds. I could take you to fields that look terrible because we didn't get the cover crop planted until November or even December. So it's imperative to get these planted early in the fall. If you chemically terminate covers, do it close to planting time. This needs to be done because, like, for example, cereal rye oozes out a funky compound. It's a liquid green, and it's about 10 days after you chemically terminate, and it will gunk up your planter and everything's going to stick to it. So just stay close to the planting time. Topsoil. This is a gentleman in Iowa, Continuum Ag. I think this is something we need to be looking at. This is going to be a one-stop platform to then it's probably going to overtake or replace Evernote for me. We're going to be able to upload everything that you've done on the farm and bring it up to this platform. We can query it. We can look at it from many different directions. We can even collect the data that would go in to an organic certification, send it right to the certifying agency. And all of this is going to speed up and make your life so much easier. And I've never seen in my time of farming a platform that can take so many different forms of of information and bring it to one location. So check it out. Grass will be the nemesis. It is. We have grass on our farm. I think it's part of this cereal rye sequestering up front, releasing later. That's fine. We now need to bring in different speed or cash crops into these situations to change that trigger, like cereals. Bring in wheat. You're harvesting your wheat. It's gone before the foxtail even gets started. You now have ability to put out another, say you put out 30 pounds of oats to help smother out that grass. Maybe you have to clip it with a flail chopper, whatever it takes. But we've now sent different messages to that foxtail, and we've now eliminated or greatly reduced a year of a weed seed flush. Don't make excuses that support your agenda. I hear this all the time. I live too far north. That won't work here. Nobody's ever done it here. It can't happen. Stop with the excuses. Figure out ways to make this happen. We've talked about several options here. Cereals, interseeding. You could apply with an airplane. Shorten your relative maturity crop. Regen. I mean, there are so many pluses here. You know, when you sit down and you start to think about a plan, and you put on your piece of paper pros on one side and cons on the other side. My page is full of all the pros. I don't have one con over on the other side of not one. I can't think of anything else we do in life that would have zero cons in it or zero bad effects. So it's just, you just back to change is good. You've got to step out of that comfort zone. Unfortunately, a farmer's success is measured by yield. I've already talked about this, and that's unfortunate. There are so many other ways to measure success. Please, let's get off of that. Okay, input reductions. Now, this is where the rubber meets the road, folks. From 11 to 20, we have reduced diesel fuel by almost 50%. Now, part of that is due to our horsepower reduction. We no longer need all of that horsepower. Get rid of it. We're down to 1,200 horsepower now. We've taken away the synthetic N, the MAP, the potash, the lime. We've taken all this away. Now, these are averages of what we've done across the farm. So in any one particular year, we may have more than 330 tons of MAP or less. These are just averages, okay, folks? So the point here is we've taken all this away. Okay, look at these savings, folks. Diesel fuel, 35,000, synthetic N, 220. I mean, you can read there. We are saving right now upwards of $828,000 per year because that's repeatable by reducing or the reduction of those inputs. If you want to come with me halfway, then let's save over $400,000. I don't know about you, that's real money. You can't do that. Oh, yes, I can. Sacrifice yield to maintain soil health. I do it every single day. Eliminate crop insurance. Don't need it. I believe so much in this system. And I believe that by taking away all of the salts and the acids and the insecticides and the herbicides and all of this, we are growing a stable system. I showed you in the slide how stable our system is. Don't need it. Plant green into living cover crops. We do it all the time. It can be done. Plant beans in the 72-inch tall rye. We do it. Planting corn into cereal rye. It can be done. We've explained how to do this. Just understand that a lot of the nutrient load is tied up front in that corn plant's early life. Just feed it some nitrogen. And if you want to eliminate synthetic nitrogen and you've got an ability to go out and broadcast solid manure, I would do that in this situation. Broadcast solid manure into V3 standing corn. It's okay to have 12 plants. I think in 20, I used every letter of the alphabet. So don't worry. Don't think that something's going wrong. Don't think you're inferior. It's okay. Mother Nature throws curveballs, and we've got to be quick and nimble and ready to change. Slow down and look for validations. For example, no ag lime in 7 years. Our pH on the farm for the average is 6.8 and rising. How can that be? We've taken away everything that's creating that imbalance. So we're letting the system work. It's a symbiotic relationship. That's a validation that tells you what you're doing is correct. And another validation is we put out pollinator strips all over the farm. Last year in 2020, we planted 45 acres of pollinator strips across the farm. Slow down and pay attention. When you walk into these pollinator strips, you're waving your arms because the bees are all around you. And if you stop and listen, you hear songbirds singing. I mean, these are things you don't typically hear on an average farm. Again, it's a validation. Park your planter no matter the date. If it's not fit to be in the field, don't go out there. I don't care if your neighbor is done. Hey, when your neighbors all get done before you get done, the roads are all wide open to move your big equipment up and down the road, then there's nobody out there to worry about. If it's not fit, don't get in there. Don't plant corn in April again. I hope I never do. I really love where we are now in this system. When I went to Purdue, I was taught that corn is king and you've got to do whatever you can to get corn planted and don't worry about those soybeans. It's a secondary crop. Don't worry about it. No, we have turned our farm upside down, inside out, twisted it in every possible direction. And because of Dr. Silva, we are now planting soybeans at boot stage and in the region that I live, boot stage is about April the 25th, plus or minus a few days. So we are now planting soybeans at the end of April into cereal rye, and then we walk away and leave. We then, and while that's happening, the legume packages that we've planted are doing the amazing work that they do, and they are now fixing the fuel that we need for our corn. So now we're planting corn after Mother's Day. And now it's a beautiful system. Beans are being planted in April, corn in May, early June, and everything now is in harmony. Plant around moth flights. This is interesting. We put out pheromone traps for black cutworm and armyworms every February. We then track the flights as they come up from the south and the southwest. We now can do the math. It's based on GDUs. We can do the math and we can determine when the peak outbreak of that brood feeding is going to be. And we have nailed the date 3 years in a row. So the reason why this is important for our system is I will not spray anything, even if it's OMRI approved, to target a species, armyworm, for example. So now that we know what that date is, and we know that corn cannot be killed until at least the V4 or 5 growth stage, we have to make sure we don't have any corn that's beyond V5 growth stage at that peak brood feeding time. Well, 3 years in a row, that peak has been right around June the 1st, May 30th to June 2nd, in that ballpark. Well, we're not even planting corn until May 15th or 20th, typically. So we are out of that now. But 2020 was a very humbling year in many ways. Mother Nature said, you know what? I'm going to send you 4 more broods of black cutworm. Wiped us out. But we knew that the corn didn't need to be replanted because it was still under that V5 stage. Totally eliminate all inputs. That includes manure. No CFAP government subsidy payments taken in 2020. None. I cannot be hypocritical, folks. If I'm going to stand up here and tell you that I am taking everything away and building this regenerative system, I am also going to take away any subsidy help out there. We do not need it. Grow the nitrogen with legumes. Regen acres, I've already talked about that. There's no cash crop. Take away all excuses. This gives you the opportunity to make this happen. Certified organic with no tillage 3-pass system. Is this proven? No. Is it viable yet? No, but it's getting better every single year. I'm staying with it. I'm not looking back. This is the future right here. To truly be regenerative, you have to take everything away. I know there's people going to disagree with me on that, and that's okay. This is where I want to be. This keeps me in a straight line heading forward with this kind of thinking process. If you're not uncomfortable with what you are doing, then you are not trying hard enough to change. Now, just think about that for a moment. I don't care if you're a farmer, a business person, I don't care what you do in your life. If you are pushing the easy button all the time, you're not trying to change. I challenge everyone here today to get a little uncomfortable. I think you will like how it feels. I'm proud to be a farmer, but I am more proud of the way I farm. I call it regenerative stewardship. Thank you very much. It's been an honor. I hope I tied together what Jimmy talked about and what Kris talked about. Folks, this can be done. I typically don't talk about how many acres we farm, but I think you got to put this to scale, Jess. We're farming around 7,000 acres, and we are able to do a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's key to point out here, Rick. And you know, you've been very transparent about the journey of everything you're doing, and I just want to highlight that, and I just want to say to you that thank you for taking us along that journey, and thank you for providing support to us so that we can kind of understand the path that you go on to. Here's a question right now: what were the 6 crops that Rick uses on his farm?
All right, what are the 6 crops again? Not in any particular order. Corn, soybeans, wheat, alfalfa, peas, and livestock. And
you know, get into livestock. You know, that's a question that the 3 of you wanted to talk about too. Let's talk a little bit about livestock. I know it is encouraged to try to incorporate that. That is one of the principles of regenerative agriculture, is being able to increase diversity of species too. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Right. The thing that's the cattle, they're doing so many good things to the land. Their footprint, their mouth, the way they grab and pull a species to rip it, the saliva that comes out of their mouth. All of these things are great for the microbial biome and how it continues to chug along. But the other thing that is, there's 2 other factors that we're using the livestock for on the farm. We're going to start them grazing out on a cool season package. Then we're going to be able to come in with a warm season package. So that's given us that time of the year to put another diversity of species out there. Then the other thing the cattle do for us, we can pull the cattle off in a timely fashion to then get the cocktail we want for the next cash crop planted at the proper time. So the benefits from the livestock are almost endless. I mean, if you really want to maximize what they're doing for you, it's amazing how many ways you can come up with.
So what Rick was saying, I think, is really important about how the cattle are going to be impacting the microbial community with the way that they graze. And so that ripping and tearing and releasing root exudates and how that's going to stimulate the microbial community. But the other thing that I wanted to bring up about livestock too is when we're talking about livestock, I want people to start thinking a little bit out of the box. It's not just talking about a ruminant animal, but it also is, when we're talking about livestock, the impact that other organisms, it's the impact on the plants that are going to be stimulating some of these additional root exudates. And so looking at other organisms in the system, you know, when we're talking about managing for livestock, Jonathan Lundgren has reminded me that we need to manage for insect populations, and they're a livestock. They're going to have an impact on the plant. and the exudates from the plant. You're going to be looking at managing, again, for birds and for bats. There was just some evaluations again that Jonathan Lundgren did about, pollinators, and that most of the pollen actually comes from grass species. So that's not something we think about in our pollinators. We're mostly thinking about other plants. So again, when we're talking about livestock, it isn't just doing that. And then the other thing that Rick brought up, which I think is a great program that different places have. Minnesota has a program like that basically I've had a friend of mine refer to it as Pasture Tinder, where it's an online program and you can then it's connecting a row crop producer with a livestock producer. And you basically can go online, and I know other states are doing this as well. And you can basically go online and it will geographically space you together to make that connection. So you're making a Tinder connection with pasture. So it's a way of being able to do that where you don't have to be the livestock producer yourself.
That's awesome. So it's like a dating app for people with livestock, for producers that want the livestock. And I feel like I had this idea a couple years ago. I should have patented. I've got plenty of people out there that could have done this app for me. So that's really awesome. Yes, the underground livestock is our herd. So one question, okay, match.cow, is that from Dale?
Match.cow, there we go.
Maybe that's his website. But so one of the questions was nematode pressure. How do we balance, the optimal, what's the optimal threshold that we're seeing on some of this pest pressure versus making a decision that is, kind of outside the regenerative framework? So can you talk a little bit about that? And then Jimmy and Rick just talk about nematode pressure.
Well, I think the first thing as far as nematodes are concerned, one, we have to remember too that most of the nematodes are not plant pathogenic. And so you want to have the nematodes in there because that's a big part of the predator and prey relationships that you're having with other organisms. Fungi and bacteria, their populations are controlled by nematodes. So that's an important component to that. And then the other component to looking at nematodes and nematode pressure is, again, the way that we design the system. We are the masters of our own disasters. We're really, really, really good we've got master's degrees and some of us PhDs in creating disasters for ourselves. And so that is how we go about managing the system. And that goes into the crops that we're putting into the rotation. If you're ending up with having some nematode pressure issues, can you look at incorporating some more brassicas into the system, because they produce some anti-emetic compounds that are going to help to manage some nematode issues. Could you add them as if it is you're in a corn bean rotation or something like that? Can you add them as companion crops in there? Some of the brassicas to be able to help to manage some of those nematode issues. So again, it's not looking, for me, it's not looking at when you get to that threshold and what that threshold is. It's more of looking at, okay, how can I go about changing the way that I'm looking at the system so I never even have to think about thresholds or non-thresholds. So it's those are the questions that I don't want to be asking myself, is what's my threshold, because I don't even think that that's an issue that I need to deal with, because I'm going to change the system to get there.
You asked me just a minute ago about what was the key takeaway today, and it's diversity. And that's exactly what Kris was just talking about. If you build the system with the diversity in it, you provide the system all the opportunities it needs to manage itself. And so as you got that cocktail mix diverse enough, you have the brassicas in there that will help take care of that, and it will balance itself, just like Rick talked about his pH correcting itself. The system, once you get it functioning the way it's supposed to, it's pretty easy on itself, and it can do great things. So we don't have that issue. And I'll let Rick talk a little bit more about what he's seeing.
Yeah, there's always unintended consequences in things that we do in life. Always. There's good ones and there's bad ones. Like I mentioned in my presentation before, I don't know what they're all called, and that's what Dr. Nichols is for. I just know that as we continue to build this diversity out, a lot of problems go away. So I can't really answer your question, Jess, only, and I'm going to say this, answer it this way. Never had a nematode problem. And it's probably due to the fact, and what I mean by that is a nematode problem that affects the health and the well-being of the cash crop to the point. So diversity, I guess, an unintended consequence that I didn't know was happening, that diversity got me there.
And if I can, I just want to add one other really quick point. There are organisms that are fungi that are called nematode trapping fungi and other fungi that are going to be killing nematodes. And one of the things that can help to stimulate those in the soil and get a higher presence of those in the soil are integrating livestock, in particular, integrating hogs into the operation. They're really good at carrying and then releasing from their gut microbiome the fungi that are going to be trapping the nematodes. So it's one of the things that I saw on a farm where they had hogs. They were doing hogs out in the crop fields. And I was actually able to see, which normally they don't, normally we've been told that we don't have the nematode trapping fungi here in the US. But it was the first time that I actually in the real world was able to see a nematode trapping fungus, and it was from this field where we had integrated the hogs into that. So again, looking at different ways for biocontrol.
Hey, Jess, can I throw out one more thing here? It's not quite exactly related, but when you go back and look at that Haney test, there is a spot in there where he's got bacteria to fungal relationships. And where are you on that spectrum? When we started down this journey of building soil health, we were a bacterial-based farm. And by doing Rick's tests every year, multiple times a year, you can start to see the shift to a fungal-based profile. And that's exactly where I want to be. And Dr. Nichols has reinforced to me, that's where we need to be. This mycorrhizal fungi is so critical to the success of this system. That's why I am so steadfast in saying you have to eliminate tillage all the way to total. Because if the microbial biome is, if they are only rebuilding their structure because we've torn them down, then they're not generating anything to help the soil health building system. So that's why I'm so exact on those comments.
Yeah, and I think that's really key to hone in on. You know, as we're going through the presentation, I've got my checklist of topics that we could have entire conferences on, and the carbon bacterial, the fungal to bacterial ratios. We talked a lot about this last year at Soil Health U and Dr. Rick Haney and Lance Gunderson, and then the use of services like Ward Labs out there being able to help us determine this and make decisions is what is so important for us. So folks, we have reached the 12 o'clock hour, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. What we're going to do now is Jenny and I are going to close out the conference, but please stick around, because as soon as we close it out, it'll just take us a minute or so. We are going to bring the speakers back, and we're going to have the casual conversation after party. So feel free to stick around for that. But for now, a little bit of closing comments. One thing that is very important to me and keeps rising to the surface of my thought process is a couple presentations that we didn't necessarily talk about today, but it's this idea of a quorum sensing, basically meaning that in the soil, the conditions have to be right. Everybody have to be playing their part, like what Kris mentioned, in the soil for the soil to function. And what I am observing right now is a quorum sensing among people. All of us are here. There are 250 people on this call across the world, and we are all kinds out there. We're producers, we're people that are consultants, we're media folks like myself, we're creative folks, we're scientists, we're farmers, we're ranchers, we are all the above. And we are coming together to create this quorum sensing so that we can take the next step in soil health. So to that effect, I am incredibly grateful that you're all here. I am incredibly grateful to High Plains Journal for producing this event. And I want to thank you for all spending your morning with us. Right now, I'm going to turn it back over to Jenny Latzke, the Associate Editor for High Plains Journal. So Jenny, take us home.
Well, thank you for that, Jess. And thank you so much for all your work today, moderating today's Soil Health U online. Now, before we head out, folks, remember just one more time, those after hours conversations will be on this same exact link. So if you want to stick around for those, don't log off, just stay put, okay? And if you need certified crop advisor CEU credits, we're going to post that QR code online right now. And we'll keep that up for a little bit while we go on. You can scan on that and get your credits accounted to you. We're also going to have a PDF that was placed in the chat box, and you can retrieve that code there. If you have any questions or you have any trouble, remember, just reach out to Kylie Reese, whose contact information is also in the box. Now, we've come to the end of Soil Health U today, the official one, but I'm incredibly grateful to all of you and for the ability to spend the time with you today, as well as with our presenters and everybody that's here. Thank you for spending all of your time with us. Thanks, Jimmy. Thanks, Kris. Thanks, Rick, and for helping us get to the root of it all. We really appreciate the fact that you took a morning out of your day to ride with us on your soil health journey. And don't forget, shortly after this meeting ends, you'll receive an email with a survey, and we ask that you let us know how we're doing and what we could do better, and maybe some topics that you'd like to see addressed for Soil Health U 2022. And we are planning to be back in Salina January of 2022. Don't forget, registered attendees will also receive an 8-week subscription to High Plains Journal. You can watch for that in your mailboxes and read up on what others in the High Plains are doing on their soil health journeys. And of course, we couldn't do today without the help of our wonderful sponsors. Thanks again to PrairieFood, Exapta Solutions, and Ward Labs for helping us provide this morning of learning. Be sure to mark your calendars for January 19th and 20th, 2022, where we will be right back in Salina, Kansas for the next in-person Soil Health U. And Jess, today we do have an exciting announcement.
I heard about that. I'm really excited to hear about it. This is the first time I think we're actually going live with this, so go ahead.
Yes. We here at High Plains Journal are rolling out a brand new event for 2022. We are calling it High Plains Journal's Farmer U and Trade Show. Now, we're gonna be meeting together at the Kansas Star Event Center in Mulvane, Kansas, August 18th and 19th. And this new event is going to bring experts in 8 different topics, all under one roof. So join us to learn more about soil health, of course, but also soybeans, corn, wheat, sorghum, alfalfa, and cotton, as well as irrigation. We are going to have experts from both the public and private sectors leading breakout sessions, as well as keynote speakers to educate and inspire. It's going to follow the same format that you've seen in many of our U events. So watch farmeru.net for registration details and the agenda as it's posted. That's farmeru.net. Well, on behalf of all of us here at High Plains Journal, thank you for riding with us, and we will see you on the trail. Have a great day and stay tuned for your after the webinar chat with Jess and our speakers.
Dirt road in a gooseneck, saddle up with me. Dry land in God's country, crops far as I can see. The headlights on both ends of my day. This country life is for me. Ride with us, HPJ. Ride with us, HPJ.